This is the first of 2 videos on the God of War franchise. This video will cover all the Spectacle Fighter titles, and the next one will be a more focused look at God of War 2018. There will be a more detailed explanation as to why this video took so long at the end, so if you're interested now, there will be a timestamp in the description. The reason I decided to break this into 2 separate videos is because I haven't even had a chance to sit down and play God of War 2018 yet, and it is longer than the combined duration of most of these games. Keep in mind that there are some parts where I set something up for some commentary in the 2018 video, but you won't get any sort of closure on those points until the next video. Since it's only going to be over one game, I suspect it will only take me a few weeks after my college finals to complete the project, but I'm very bad at gauging how long these things will take. I really want to thank everybody for their patience, and I'm sorry I kept you waiting. In this video, I'm going to go through all the games while focusing mostly on the story, but not completely ignoring the gameplay side of things. The first game we will look at is just that, the first game. The first God of War lays all the groundwork that needs to be known for every other game in the franchise, so there is no better place to begin. From there, I'll take us back through all the prequels and eventually into the sequels, moving in chronological order based off the in-game timeline. But before I do that, I would first like to address a few things about these videos. Bear in mind that these games have an ample amount of gore and nudity, so if that's something that bothers you, then you might want to consider listening to this video as opposed to watching it. I did my best to censor the nudity, but there are some parts in gameplay that I couldn't manage because of how quickly the enemies move around. It's also important to note that some of these games, Ascension in particular, were rushed during development and are going to have longer critique sessions than others. The dev team for Ascension wanted to implement a multiplayer feature that sapped the studio's resources and took focus off the main story, which is why some areas in that game feel very unbalanced. I'll talk more about it when we get there. Without further ado, because trust me, I could ado for much longer than you think, let's get into it. The first God of War game should be respected as the beginning of such an iconic franchise, but that doesn't mean you're obligated to enjoy it. I played through all these games on hard mode, and while it wasn't the most difficult, it was certainly one of the most frustrating. The game has several flaws, the most noticeable of which are in the combat system since you spend so much time in it, and since I've already brought it up, it's probably best to just get the combat analysis out of the way early. In a game so heavily focused on combat, the last thing you want is for it to become monotonous or frustrating. God of War has an extensive moveset to prevent the first, but it fails miserably at the second, in my opinion. There were several moments while playing when I would stop to write a full-page rant about the game's combat because of how much it triggered me. This room, and another one a while later, perfectly showcases some of the flaws that I've noticed as I play the game. The freezing effect of the Gorgons can stack if multiples of them do it at the same time. In this example, they freeze me before I can even finish a 3-move combo to interrupt it, and another goes for an attack the literal nanosecond I become frozen, and it kills me instantly. In later entries, you can roll to avoid this effect, but I'm not sure if it works in this one, or maybe I just didn't think to try it. Regardless, I've noticed how a lot of enemies can overlap their attacks and hit you while you're still responding to the first one. You can be hit during any animation except for executions, but that hasn't stopped the game from bugging out and making me take damage during those too. If you go for a parry to sweep the entire herd in front of you, but an enemy is already locked into an animation, you're going to get hit and staggered before you can complete the move. This was corrected in God of War 2 by giving you invincibility during parry animations. On top of this problem, I've noticed on several occasions that a grab will just outright not work sometimes. This happened to me the most during fights with Minotaurs, but I've also experienced it with Cyclopses and Legionaries. At first, I thought this was a result of a behind-the-scenes attack queue that can't be interrupted, but sometimes I wouldn't be able to grab an enemy even if it wasn't doing anything, so I don't really know what the problem is. I've noticed that rooms with multiples of the same enemy are much tougher than those that have an assortment. A room full of Cerberus pups is on my list of the most frustrating encounters because they can attack you so quickly that it can stun lock you before you even have a chance to get a hit in. The solution was just to block at every opportunity and try to slowly chip their health down, but this won't work in other encounters with them since they have the ability to transform into a fully grown Cerberus if you take too long. The most frustrating part was that every time I failed, I got set back to a checkpoint that came before a tutorial that played every single time I got to it, freezing me in place for 3 to 5 seconds. All the games have some horribly placed checkpoints, so this is more of a franchise-wide criticism. There was a challenge later on involving centaurs where I would have one of them staggered, but the other would counterattack before I could finish, or they'd pull out a bow and start pelting me with arrows when I had little chance to properly react. But above all else, I think that regular fodder legionaries are by far the most annoying. They always spam their overhead attack and can hit me while I'm parrying. They can go from being staggered immediately into a spin attack because there's no proper telegraph for when an attack comes out of a stagger state, and they have way too much health for how common they are. I think that even the developers agreed because they're much more manageable in the second game. I wouldn't call this combat system bad, but it is far from perfect and can be infuriating on higher difficulties. This is the main reason I decided to play all these games on hard mode, not because I'm a masochist, but because it helps you better identify whether or not it has problems. You'll find out a little later that I had issues with almost every combat system in every game in the franchise. With that out of the way, let's talk about the story. When you start the game, you're greeted with a cutscene of Kratos trying to commit suicide. This is a pretty dark opening to the game, which fits its themes perfectly, but it also makes you want answers. The reason I mention this now is because that's what 90% of the game is. You're given an objective to follow, and as you travel through this world, you'll encounter cutscenes giving some insight into Kratos' past, but leaving you with just enough questions for the game to sink its big meaty claws into you and prevent you from wanting to really give up during the tougher moments. And boy, are there some tough moments in this game. I felt that there was little in the way of interesting gameplay as you carve your way through the levels, but you're rewarded for your commitment with some more breadcrumbs about Kratos' backstory. So despite the fact that there's a lot to criticize in this game, there's really little to talk about for the majority of it. After witnessing Kratos attempt suicide, you're brought back to 3 weeks earlier. Kratos was a champion to the gods, and while that may sound fancy, it really means he was just their errand boy. He was sent to kill the Hydra, which Poseidon says has been plaguing his sea for years, but what he doesn't say is why he hasn't done anything about it until now. I'm not going to criticize the game for giving you a reason to have a cool boss fight, but I'm mentioning this for a point I'll make much later. After defeating the Hydra, Kratos goes inside the mouth to get the key off the ship captain that it swallowed so he can save some women that the captain locked in his quarters. You do find him, and you're given your first look at how Kratos treats other people.
Thank the gods you came back for me!
I didn't come back for you.
No!
If you thought he was a good person, then you were wrong. This turns out to matter little because all the women have been butchered by these monsters. This triggers Kratos' memories of his past, but I want to talk about all his backstory at once, so we'll skip it until later. What is important is that these visions have been tormenting him for a long time, and it's pretty obvious he's fed up with it.
Athena! 10 years, Athena. I have faithfully served the gods for 10 years. When will you relieve me of these nightmares?
Athena offers him his final task. Ares is attacking Athens and Kratos needs to stop him. Zeus has forbidden gods from waging war with each other, so he's using Kratos as a proxy. He asks if the gods will rid him of his nightmares, and she says that if he does this for them, then his sins will be forgiven. This involves you traveling to Athens, where you're contacted by the Oracle. You can see Ares fight the entire army of Athens in the background, and you can actually see how this battle has progressed when you come back later. As you proceed through the city, you'll encounter a woman who runs away at the sight of you. She recognizes Kratos and accidentally falls to her death when trying to get away. This is the second person who has done this, the first being back during the Hydra sequence. A soldier locks himself in a jail cell as the ship is sinking, and said he'd rather die than be saved by you. Whenever I first saw this, my response was something along the lines of, "Okay buddy, your funeral." But it does say a lot about how Kratos is viewed by others, and it adds to that intrigue. Whatever Kratos has done in his past, people would rather face death than simply interact with him. Before you make it to the Oracle, you get introduced to the Gravedigger. He's digging this grave, shocking I know, but also says that it's for you. He tells you not to worry about it and to go find the Oracle. This seems out of place right now, but it'll make sense later. You save the Oracle from falling to death, and she tells you that you need to search for Pandora's box in order to get the power to kill a god, which is the only way you can stop Ares. This is your main objective for almost the entire game, and you'll spend most of it in Pandora's temple. You cross a bridge shaped like a giant sword and make your way there. It doesn't take long to make it inside Pandora's temple, but it feels like an eternity before you get a chance to leave. I spent about 8 hours playing this game, and I feel like 6.5 of it was spent inside this temple. That doesn't sound like so much on paper, after all 6 hours in game is child's play compared to the latest God of War game, but it is brought down by how there is almost no change of scenery. I hope you like shades of brown and beige, because you're going to be seeing a lot of it until the end of the game. Combat can oftentimes feel fatiguing because of how many encounters they stack against you with little room to breathe, and if you haven't been upgrading your Blades of Chaos, you're in for a tough time. From the time you get introduced to the Cerberus, you will fight more Cerberus while being pelted by archers with explosive arrows, fight multiple legionary captains who can block most of your attacks, fight 3 hammer minotaurs that have one of but not the toughest button mashes required to get the HP from the execution, come to a puzzle that involves you pushing a caged soldier up an incline and into a sacrificial chamber while the tanky legionary captains are on infinite respawn. This can cause you to miss out on the chests up ahead as well, get Poseidon's trident and swim to the room full of Cerberus pups I mentioned earlier, earlier, swim back out and fight a full-grown Cerberus and some harpies, and then proceed into various rooms with numerous tough enemies, then take a secret exit out of a room to come back to the beginning of the temple. There are checkpoints and chests sprinkled between some of these areas, but you usually only have a choice of magic or health, which I always chose health so I wouldn't die. I'd also like to mention that in this brief summary I just gave, it took me over an hour and a half to get through. It would have been much shorter if I didn't die as many times as I did, and while not all this time was spent in combat because of the swimming portions, it felt like I wasn't given any time to do anything except move from combat arena to combat arena with only some easy and basic puzzles in between. And that's only one portion of the bottom half of Pandora's Temple. From there you have an entirely separate wing with its own boss at the end, and then you're allowed to move to the upper Pandora's Temple for more traps, puzzles, and combat against the dreaded twin-blade satyrs that made me die a little on the inside when I saw them. These are what I consider to be the toughest enemy in the game, and there are at least 1 or 2 per combat arena with some exceptions. I cannot stress to you enough the sinking feeling I got when I saw these guys for the first time. If I were to make a list of video game enemies that scarred me for life, these guys would be in my top 5. Anyways, the final room before you get to Pandora's box is one of the hardest in the entire game. What precedes is a room full of moving platforms that you must fight on. I found out the hard way that the game will insta-kill you if you stand on the stationary platforms for too long. This part represents the worst of the combat in this game, constantly being staggered by 1,000 things at once. Add that with traps and moving platforms and you've got the toughest part of this game. You're constantly staggered by arrows, which, like everything else in the game, can damage you for a wider range than they appear. The harpy dive bombs can't be blocked, and getting stunned means you're taking double damage because of the traps. My game bugged out more than a few times on this spot, and the frame rate plummets whenever more than one harpy tries to dive bomb. Reliably dodging the harpies is a challenge on its own because of all the moving platforms, and getting stunned into the traps is just annoying. With how long this section goes on, it really did become a bit of a chore by the end of it. You finally get Pandora's box, and Athena tells you to bring it to Athens while there's still time. Ares senses that Kratos has possession of the box, and Tom Brady's a giant stake, which impales Kratos to the wall. As he bleeds out, you get the final cutscene into his past, which means I can talk about what made this man who he is. Kratos was a ruthless Spartan general who was feared by everybody, except his wife. During one of his campaigns, he and his men came against an army of barbarians. They turned out to be no match for the savages, and Kratos was about to be killed by the barbarian king. He called out to Ares, pledging his life to him if he would help destroy the barbarian army. Ares obliged, and gifted Kratos with the Blades of Chaos, which are seared onto his skin and can never be removed. From this time forward, Kratos would serve as Ares' personal assassin, killing anybody that he was sent after despite if they actually deserved it. On his final mission, he led his men to a village of Athena worshippers and began to slaughter everybody.
Burn this village! Burn it to the ground!
The village oracle told Kratos not to enter the threshold, and although he was initially hesitant, he still went in and killed everybody in the building. It wasn't until after the slaughter that he found the bodies of his wife and daughter, dead by his hands. Ares is the one who arranged this with the intent of Kratos killing his family to get rid of what was holding him back. The village oracle cursed Kratos to forever wear the ashes of his family on his skin as a monument to his sins, which would cause him to be known as the Ghost of Sparta. This caused Kratos to turn away from Ares, and he would now have a chance to get his revenge. That is, if he wasn't dying. The next section has you falling into Hades, then grabbing and climbing onto the ship captain from the beginning of the game, causing him to fall into the river Styx. You fight through the underworld until you come to a rock with a rope tied to it that falls out of the sky. You use this to climb out of Hades, and it turns out that the Gravedigger is responsible for getting you out. He tells Kratos that Athena isn't the only god watching after him, and tells you to go kill Ares. When you make it back to the Oracle, you find her dying. Ares is boasting to Zeus how he both destroyed Athens and foiled their plans to stop him. Kratos retrieves the box with the help of some magic, and then grows just as large as Ares when he opens it. This kicks off the final boss, and I've gotta say that I like it. Ares can do an insane amount of damage if you're not careful, but all his moves can be avoided if you simply commit to learning the pattern. I have noticed that the telegraph for one move in particular can get interrupted if you attack relentlessly, causing you to get hit for massive damage out of nowhere. Being more reserved fixes this problem at the cost of some extra damage. In the second phase, Ares pulls you into an alternate dimension where you need to defend Kratos' wife and daughter against a horde of other, more sinister Kratos. This sequence is awful, and you can't change my mind. It suffers from the exact same problem as every other group fight in the game, but with the added bonus of needing to protect his family, which they will almost always target, and it just goes on for far longer than it needs to. At the end of this phase, it was all for nothing. Ares rips off the Blades of Chaos and kills Kratos' family with them, then pulls you back into the fighting arena. Just as Kratos is about to be put down, he notices the giant sword bridge from before. Using this as a weapon, you go into the final phase, which ditches the traditional health bar to give you a dual health bar. Your side fills when Ares gets hit, and vice versa. This is interesting because it is less about health and more about resolve, and you can only win by proving that yours is the strongest. Once Ares is defeated, he tells Kratos that he only wanted to make him a better warrior, and Kratos puts him down for good. With Athens saved, Kratos returns to speak to Athena about their arrangement. Athena tells him that she promised to forgive his sins, but never promised to get rid of his nightmares. She says that Olympus is grateful for what he did, but you can't help but feel like that's receiving a snide thank you while being given the middle finger. This brings us back to the beginning, with Kratos deciding that he'd rather die than continue to be haunted by his past. Athena saves him from his fall, telling him that he isn't allowed to kill himself because of what he's done. Instead, he's to succeed Ares as the new god of war. I guess his sins weren't completely forgiven, or the gods wouldn't feel the need to intervene because of them. In any case, you sit down on the throne, and you can congratulate yourself for getting through it all. This game is not easy, and it's probably my least favorite out of all of them. However, I do respect it for being the first of a franchise that I love so much. There wouldn't be any better games if it weren't for this one, and it's understandable that it would have so many issues considering it was the studio's first attempt, but the problems did hinder the experience for me. Many people treat some games like they're above criticism due to circumstance or nostalgia, and I know this game was released on the PlayStation 2 and it's unfair to hold it to modern standards, but I'd compromise the integrity of this video if I ignored the problems outright. With the foundations from the first game laid, we can finally move on to the other titles. Overall, I really didn't have a lot of fun revisiting this game, and I'm eager to move on to the games that I remember being much better. But before I can do that, I need to play Ascension. Okay, jokes aside, Ascension really isn't that bad. The combat is significantly different from the rest of the franchise, and while the story is rather lackluster, I prefer the gameplay to any other game besides 3 in 2018. It's by no means perfect and certainly feels rushed in many areas, but I like the way the combat was handled. I just wish it had a lot more work put into some of the areas to help smooth out the difficulty a little bit. As opposed to waiting until later, why don't we go ahead and take a look at the combat right now? I mentioned earlier that God of War Ascension had a rough development cycle, and it definitely shows. I encountered several bugs while playing the game that resulted in my death. Most of these were grapple points not properly registering when I pressed the button, but other times were QuickTime events outright not accepting my inputs and just killing me. There was that one example during the final boss where I both passed and failed a QuickTime event that just killed me. I didn't realize this was a bug until I got my chance to try it again. The next part didn't help any whenever Kratos tripped over nothing and died instantly. This game has flaws, and they're a result of the studio's own ambition, yet I still think the core combat systems are sound. I got much more enjoyment out of this combat system than any other game that came before God of War 3. Every other game that tried to incorporate secondary weapons has been more or less unsuccessful. Chains of Olympus and Ghost of Sparta do better in this regard, but at the cost of a majority of their magic abilities being underwhelming. The Ifrit in Chains of Olympus sticks out as my favorite ability in all these games because of how cool the concept is, but Ghost of Sparta fails to deliver with any of its magic abilities. Contrarily, God of War 1 and 2 have powerful AoE magic but borderline useless secondary weapons, and God of War 2 doesn't get this ability until almost the end of the game. God of War 3 changed this by giving you more weapons like the Blades of Chaos with specialized magic associated with them, and Ascension takes this one step further. There's no secondary weapons, there are 4 elemental modes for your blades: Fire of Ares, Ice of Poseidon, Lightning of Zeus, and Soul of Hades. All of these have their own unique moveset and special moves, as well as their specialized magic ability that is specific to that element. There are more changes that affect how you play though, because now the rage system has been reworked to build on these mechanics. In every other game, your rage ability has been a power-up that significantly increases your damage and attack speed. It is meant to be a last resort tool that you would use to clear an entire room of enemies that are giving you trouble, but never something you want to use the second you fill the meter. In God of War 2 and 3, this is taken one step further by removing your ability to block, which to me meant that I almost never used it because it just resulted in me taking too much damage, although it's a lot better in 3 than it is in 2. Ascension changes this entirely by causing your rage meter to fill much faster in combat but draining every time you take damage. You're restricted to 4 move combos until it's full, then the full length combos are unlocked as long as you can avoid taking damage. Your special moves are enhanced when the meter is full and everything at your disposal gets a significant buff, including your element's usual combo finishers. Alternatively, you can drain your rage meter with a powerful move that is specific to which element you have equipped. On top of this, killing enemies with a specific element's finisher move will give you specific orbs: Rage for Fire, Large XP for Ice, Magic for Lightning, and Health for Soul. You can seamlessly transition between these elements, and it's honestly really satisfying to do. The combat isn't all great though, and it has far more than its fair share of problems. The most noticeable in the beginning is the camera. Every game I've played except for 2018 has camera problems in some areas, but it's obvious that Ascension's is much more intentional because the developers wanted a real sense of scale for this game. Some of the fights have the camera zoomed out far so you can see everything the boss is doing, but it comes to the cost of not being able to see what you or the smaller enemies are doing. It's visually impressive, but it makes it extremely awkward while playing. It only happens in a few areas though and can be easier to handle once you've seen it a few times. Another problem is a little more fundamental because there are more changes to the usual combat flow than just the rage meter. Your parry has been switched from blocking just before an attack lands to blocking and pressing X just before an attack lands. This activates a specific animation that has a recovery period afterward, meaning you need to really get those timings down. The game helps you out by highlighting some enemies' moves with a bright streak to telegraph the parry time, but not all enemies have this and can still be parried. The game also restricts the window that you can parry in, meaning the move sometimes won't activate if you try to do it too late, which is either a bug or a safety net. Successfully parrying some enemies will stagger them, which allows you to perform a grab and use them as weapons. The problem with this combat system begins when you get later into the game. Enemies may be able to damage each other, but that doesn't stop their attacks from overlapping in unfair ways. There are some parts that have so much going on that you oftentimes will dodge away from one attack and straight into another, assuming your dodge didn't decide to stop working because of how fickle it is. Seriously, sometimes my dodge would just outright not work, or would delay enough for me to get hit anyways. It seems like invincibility frames were removed from the dodge in this game, or they are so few that you may not be able to notice them at all. The reality is that the combat is probably just lacking some refinement. The final gauntlet of the game is so difficult that it caused me to quit playing my first time, and I heavily considered it this time as well. The difficulty feels rather imbalanced, and it's obvious that some spots didn't get enough playtesting to reach their potential. The boss fights feel much more fair, with the double battle between the two Furies, Megara and Tisiphone, being one of the best fights in the entire game. You get a chance to fight them individually, and then together when neither of them hold back. It's a lot of fun to work through, and it's satisfying to dominate a 2v1 fight with all the tools you have at your disposal. So to finish off this section that turned out much longer than I wanted it to, the combat in Ascension has some truly great concepts but fails to deliver a well-balanced experience because of how much time and resources the now discontinued multiplayer took. I won't criticize Santa Monica Studios for trying something new. Multiplayer was a concept that every game director had considered during their project, and one of them was brave enough to give it a go. Whether or not it was successful I can't say, but what I can say is that the single player, the main attraction of these games, suffered as a result of it. And speaking of that single player, I should probably get on with the story, shouldn't I? After all, that is the main attraction of this video, so let's get right into it. Ascension is a bit more story-focused than the previous game, so there's a bit more to talk about. The opening cinematic speaks about a battle between the ancient primordials, which were beings that predate both the Titans and the gods. From this battle, the Furies were born, who were the arbiters of justice, or at least what they consider as justice. The first to break a blood oath with a god was Aegean the Hecatoncheires. The Furies decided that death was too merciful for oathbreakers, so they instead tortured him, mutilating his body into a giant prison to house all who would break a blood oath with a god. Once you start a new game, you see another cutscene saying that Kratos has been defeated, captured, and tortured. You wake up to see he's been imprisoned. If you recall, the Blades of Chaos can't be removed from him, so they instead bolted them down to prevent him from using them. One of the Furies, Megara, appears to say that she has some unfinished business with him. Naturally, it doesn't take long for Kratos to break free of his chains and send her packing. You chase her through the prison and will find out that the Furies are using illusions to almost control Kratos in a way. At first, it may seem obvious that a prison full of oathbreakers wouldn't have a whorehouse, but it is revealed later that these illusions have more of a psychological effect on Kratos than they may appear. He only snaps out of it whenever he sees a ring on one of the women. Remember this ring because it's going to be important a little later. Megara uses her bug parasites to infect the Hecatoncheires' head, and although it's a pretty cool fight, it does suffer because you can barely see what's going on. You fight a giant parasitic hand that you've battled a couple times up until now and use it to get to Megara, where you kill her for good. Kratos picks up a relic of some kind, and it's confirmed that he's suffering some short-term amnesia. You then get a flashback to 3 weeks before and see Kratos in his house. This takes place shortly after Kratos killed his family, and somebody appears to tell him that he's stuck in an illusion. He says he can help break his bond to Ares, and he gives Kratos 2 items that belong to his wife and daughter, one of which is as the ring from earlier. It may make sense then that seeing his ring broke the illusion back at the brothel, but I'm going to spoil it now and say Kratos holds onto this ring for the entire game, so I have no idea why the Fury Tisiphone has possession of it. It isn't part of the illusion either because she wears it when not casting one. I expected to find out later in the story that she stole the ring from Kratos when he was captured, but even later in the game you'll see Alecto wearing one too, and Tisiphone doesn't give it to her because she's still wearing hers. So, either there are 3 of these rings and it's just a massive coincidence that 2 of the Furies happen to own one, and it's the trigger to pull Kratos out of an illusion, or it was meant to make sense, but the story was rushed and this detail got lost along the way. Regardless, it's a plot hole. Back on topic, the Spectre tells Kratos to find the Oracle of Delphi to help rid him of his illusions. You make your way there and find out that the entire village you're in is dead. Remember this, there is not one living person in this entire village, they're all dead. You make your way to the mountains where you find the entrance to the Temple of Delphi, which can only be reached by using 3 giant snakes to move the temple towards your platform. Then you can enter. Inside, there is a mist that makes everything decay around you. You can use this to break open the door and solve various puzzles within the temple. Once you've worked your way through, you come to the boss of this area, the conjoined twins Castor and Pollux. They have an amulet that lets them control the life and death of whatever it's cast on, which the mist gets its power from. They use it to make themselves younger and try to stop you from reaching the Oracle. Once you've knocked Castor unconscious, Pollux takes control and starts trying to kill you with magic. In a last-ditch effort to thwart your plans, he uses the amulet to destroy the Oracle's throne and fall into the trench below. The platform eventually crumbles beneath you, and then you quite literally rip Pollux off of Castor's body. Once at the bottom, you finish off the little prick for good and take the amulet of Ouroboros, which allows you to repair things that were previously destroyed or slow down enemies in combat. You make it to the Oracle, Alethea, where she's barely alive. Kratos tries to use the amulet to save her, but it has no effect. She tells Kratos that the Spectre who helped you before is the Fury Orcos. As she dies, she tells him to find the Eyes of Truth in a place called the Lantern of Delos. With that, she succumbs to her injuries and you move on. Back at the village from before, you will eventually come to a harbor where a ship will take you where you need to go. Let me run that by you again. This empty, dead village has a harbor with a ship full of people who will take you to Delos without question. It struck me as odd while I played, but seriously, why are these people here? There isn't a single living soul in this village, and yet there's a ship in the harbor ready to go as if they've just been waiting for Kratos to show up. I'm bringing this up because there are countless contrivances in this game, especially in gameplay. Ascension was the first God of War to feature the Uncharted-style climbing sections, which you'll see more of in 2018. And there's a big problem with it in both those games. There are moments when you should be able to climb on something, but the game won't let you because it isn't scripted. This was seldom a problem in the previous games because all the climbing was done with the Blades of Chaos, so you knew if something wasn't accessible. Here's an example. A few minutes before getting to the harbor, you will use the amulet to solve a puzzle with this water wheel. The whole purpose is to climb to the top so you can reconstruct that bridge and get across. Doing this restores the flow of water to the village and presumably saves it from being stuck as a wasteland. The way you solve this puzzle involves freezing the pieces in midair, pulling back a lever, blocking it off with this piece so it doesn't retract while you make your way to the platform, then repairing the wheel so it can take you to the top. This is a neat puzzle, but there's no reason that Kratos can't climb these boards to get to the top. There's another example later on where Kratos could very easily climb up this giant gear to get to the platform, the same gear that he's been climbing for hours up until this point and will continue to climb in the rest of the area. But because it isn't scripted, he needs to go all the way around and climb across the top of this just to climb onto the exact same ledge he could very easily have reached from down below. And of course, I saved the best for last. There's a challenge right before one of the toughest fights that has you pulling a lever to the end of a moving platform that causes these gears to start moving. The goal is to jump on this one at the end, which is right next to the lever. Instead of jumping over this small railing and grabbing the platform, you need to go back across the moving floor, which causes you to get boxed in by 2 vents shooting fire as wave after wave of enemy comes down to try and kill you. All you need to do is throw them into the fire by the troves, and yet more keep jumping down as if they're tired of living. Once you kill all the enemies, the vents magically stop, and you can proceed. Killing these enemies had nothing to do with how long the vents shoot flames at you, but the people working on this game didn't have the time to make sure these things made sense, or video game contrivances were more commonplace in 2013 so nobody cared. These sailors being at the port of a dead city makes no sense. There's nobody for them to trade with here, and it's long since been abandoned, so word should have traveled by this point in time. In case you think this is the only time I'm going to point out stupid things these games do, there's a part in Chains of Olympus that I'm going to bully like a fat kid at my junior high who wore a motocross shirt that was at least 2 sizes too small for him, forever dubbing him motocross for the rest of his days. Legend has it that motocross turned his life around, lost 50 pounds, and gained another 50 of pure muscle. He still wears shirts that are too tight for him, but now he wears them with pride. My friends and I will one day make a movie out of this story starring Jason Statham as motocross, and it will be an international success, the likes of which hasn't been seen since 2003 drama The Room. Religious sermons aside, you'll hear the story of Orcos. He's the son of Ares and the Fury Queen, Alecto. Ares wanted to create the perfect warrior so that he could eventually overthrow Zeus, so he decided to mix his powerful genes with Alecto's. In his mind, this would work, but Orcos must have gotten all the recessive genes because he turns out to be a bit of a screw-up. The Furies decided not to kill him and put him to work binding the oaths of those who make them. He never questioned what his parents were doing until Ares tricked Kratos into killing his family. He then sought out the truth, and that's when he found out what they were planning. He and Alethea went to warn Olympus of Ares' plot, and as punishment, the Furies had her eyes scooped out and placed in the Lantern of Delos. Orcos wants to help Kratos free himself from Ares, but Kratos turns him away because he doesn't trust him. You cut back to the present with Kratos standing over Megaera's dead body. Once you step into the next area, you will come to a room full of Spartans. The king begins to recognize Kratos with some honors or award, I'm not really sure. Kratos once again sees through the illusion, and Tisiphone flies off. Not too long after, you get attacked by her phoenix, and Kratos pulls something out of its chest. You get another flashback to when Kratos arrived at Delos, with the remains of a decrepit statue in the background. After the ship drops you off, they get attacked by what appears to be a kraken and die. Their convenience to the plot had run its course, and the world had no use for them anymore. Much like the first game, you'll spend the rest of Ascension here at Delos, except it doesn't feel fatiguing because it comes roughly halfway through the game instead of near the beginning. The convenience of this is that I don't need to cover as many details between plot points. You will eventually come to another illusion of Sparta. This is Kratos' first real encounter with the fairies. Fairies? Reading is hard, guys. This is Kratos' first real encounter with the Furies, and it starts off the fight with some illusionary Spartans. Eventually, Megaera steps in and it results in her losing an arm. She tags out with Tisiphone and you then fight her and her phoenix for a while. Finally, you fight both of them at once in the sequence I mentioned earlier. As long as the game doesn't bug out, you throw Megaera off the platform and watch as the Kraken from before sinks the lantern to the bottom of the sea, and impale Tisiphone on a spike. Alecto shows up and throws her black sticky on Kratos so he can't move. It's revealed that you were fighting an illusion of Tisiphone, so she's still alive. That bitch is nothing if not slightly inconvenient. Orcos arrives and teleports Kratos away, then gives you the Oath Stone of Orcos, which is used to create copies of yourself for puzzles and combat. Much later, after the fire vent part I mentioned earlier, you will use the amulet to raise the lantern out of the sea. You'd been repairing the statue as you traveled to this part, and now you can see it in its former glory. You can see a Manticore conveniently flying across the open stretch of ocean at the very moment we need to get into the lantern, so Kratos uses it to fly there. You kill the Manticore and are free to solve the puzzles needed to get to the Eyes of Truth. This requires you to finish the gauntlet I mentioned earlier, and when you get finished, you find the Furies have captured Orcos. Tisiphone sends her stupid frickin' bird to get the Oath Stone from you, which prevents Kratos from being able to get free of Alecto's black sticky. This is the moment that Kratos is captured and brought to the prison, and we return to the present to finish things up. The next room is another illusion that shows Kratos in his house where his daughter is sleeping. His wife is also there, and once again it's the ring that reminds Kratos it's not real. Alecto tries to persuade him to return to Ares by telling him they'll let him live in the illusion, and he refuses. You get the eyes from Alecto and she turns into a Charybdis. You know, normal stuff. This begins a fight with you being thrown into another illusion and fighting several Spartans like before. Afterwards, Alecto shows up and you get to slice at her tentacles. After getting through another buggy QuickTime event, you cut off one of Alecto's tentacles, then jump into the water, grab onto her, and somehow manage to full force stab her while she's underwater. She drops you off on a nice piece of land and you swing at her until Tisiphone comes back. This is now another double battle, except it's a bit more annoying than the last one because it feels more rushed. After defeating them both, you're pulled out of the illusion, and I'm just gonna play this part because of how much I enjoy it.
You shame Sparta, Oathbreaker.
You are not fit to be called a Spartan. I lost everything because of you.
They were not there by chance, Kratos.
Seriously, this ending gets extra points just because you get to kill that godforsaken bird and then beat the stupid bitch to death. Toxic masculinity for the win, motherfuckers. You really need to play the game to understand just how much of a nuisance those two have been every time you run into them. Finally, you get your chance to kill Alecto, and her death frees everyone from their oaths. With the Furies dead, Kratos returns home. Orcus told him that after his capture, his mothers once again made him Kratos' Oathkeeper, and that he would need to die for him to be free. If Kratos didn't kill him, then Ares would torture him for what he did. Kratos initially refuses, but eventually accepts.
I was never the warrior my father wanted me to be. Please, all I ask, give me an honorable death.
Upon Orko's death, the memory of what Kratos did came rushing back and began to haunt him as the visions that he was suffering from in the first game. Kratos burns down his house and sets out to undo all the wrong he did while serving Ares. The game ends with him walking away from his burning home, not with any long speeches from Athena or Zeus, just with him setting out to do some good in his life. I've said most of how I feel about Ascension in the earlier sections, but I'd really like to see this game remastered. It'll never happen because it's considered a flop in Sony's eyes, but it could never be fully realized on the PS3, and I really did enjoy it. With some slight balancing tweaks, the difficulty of some of those areas could be smoothed out, and I could see myself playing this game several times if the performance was better. I really do like this game, and it's a shame the multiplayer drew so much of the studio's resources, because with a little more focus, this could have had the best combat in the entire series. With 2 games down, we can move on to our next game, Chains of Olympus. Chains of Olympus takes place during the 10 years that Kratos served as the champion to the gods. This game doesn't require a long and drawn-out combat analysis like the last few have, because it only has one problem. It's way too easy. There were times when I needed to check to make sure I was still on hard mode because I only struggled in a handful of areas, but that was more due to the camera than anything else. And then at the very end, the difficulty spikes like the devs went, this is the final boss. Make a final and bossy. Does that get my point across? Oh well. All the issues that this combat system have will come back in Ghost of Sparta, but they're actually noticeable there because the game is much more difficult, so I'll wait until then to discuss it. This game starts differently than most in the series. The Persians are invading Greece and Kratos is here to stop them. You will be attacked by a Cyclops, which gets attacked by a Basilisk. Moving into the city will have you come against the Persian king. After smashing his face in with a chest of gold, the way every man wants to go, you acquire the Ifrit, or Ifrit as this game pronounces it. This is one of my favorite magic abilities in all these games. It's a powerful AoE attack that looks cool and feels good to use, and it makes me feel like a man. You continue through the city until finally facing off with the Basilisk for our final showdown. What the game lacks in difficulty, it makes up for in bugs, and I died several times for this reason. After defeating the Basilisk, Kratos shouts at the gods to give him another task, and you get to watch as the sun falls out of the sky, casting the world into total darkness. This causes Morpheus, the god of dreams, to release the miasma and put all the priests of Vermina to sleep. That's a Skyrim reference for all 4 of you who haven't played that game. Kratos begins to hear a strange melody coming from the fog as you make your way to the Temple of Helios. Once there, Athena tells Kratos that the gods need him once more. She says that Helios has been taken and that Morpheus is putting all the gods to sleep with his fog. So we need to find Helios and bring him back. You get another moment of, do you seriously mean to tell me that Kratos can't get through this way, before backtracking all the way around just to open a gate and stop this pesky firebomber from giving you blue balls and preventing you from opening this door. Once in the temple, another god, Eos, tells you that the Titan Atlas has taken Helios, possibly to destroy the world. You grab the sun shield in the next room and gain access to more parts of the temple. Once you step outside, you'll find that the fog has progressed. After solving some puzzles, you step through a painting and find yourself in the caves of Olympus. You take Triton's lance so you can breathe underwater and make your way to Eos, and she tells Kratos that without Helios, the primordial fire will eventually go out and all humanity will die, which is secondary to Morpheus trying to tell everyone a bedtime story. She says that if he helps them, that Helios will convince Zeus to release him from his service to the gods. Kratos says that that will never happen, but agrees to find Helios regardless in order to save the world from Morpheus. The primordial fire is the everlasting flame that sustains life on Earth. It was borrowed without asking by Prometheus and given to man, which condemned him to eternal torture of having a giant bird eat his liver every day, which would regenerate every night. This isn't 100% faithful to the mythology, but not much in the games are, so keep in mind that what's canon in God of War isn't entirely true regarding the source material, in case you thought that it was more faithful than it actually is. This isn't a criticism, by the way. I was just surprised by how little I knew about Greek mythology whenever I started reading it recently and only had information from the games. They're not the most reliable source for these stories. Without Helios, this fire will go out and everyone will die. So, to prevent the primordial fire from going out, we take the primordial fire and use it to upgrade our shield. After grabbing the ancient flame of utmost importance that should it ever go out will surely doom humanity to a fate worse than death, We jump into this underground lake and swim to the other side. If it sounds like I'm being overly cynical, it's because this is so ridiculous to me that I can't help but make fun of it. Eos just got done telling us that the world will basically end if the fire goes out, so we take it from its resting place and jump into a lake. This would have been the perfect opportunity to cap off this area with a puzzle at least acknowledging that the flame can't get wet. But nope, it's just forgotten about. I guess Kratos shoves it up his ass to keep it dry or something. Maybe that's why he walks the way he does in this game. He has to live with a butt plug that feels like icy hot at all times.
When the heat is on, the pain is gone.
Introducing heat therapy from Icy Hot.
After solving a few puzzles in different locations of the temple, you learn that the melody you keep hearing is the song of Kratos' daughter, Calliope. Soon after, you summon Helios' chariot so they can lead you where he was taken. Kratos blacks out and has a flashback to his wife and daughter, once again reminding him of what he did. When he wakes up, he finds himself in the underworld, and the fire steeds fade away after dropping us off on the edge of Hades. Moving forward, you ring a bell to call the ferry to cross the river Styx. This was actually just an elaborate ruse to blow out your eardrums with a cutscene that doesn't abide by the rules of the options menu. This happened a number of times, and at first I didn't know what the issue was. It wasn't until I was playing through Ghost of Sparta that I found out the issue. Both of the PSP games have a glitch where the settings reset after you restart your PS3. You can fix this by simply tweaking your audio in the main menu, but I didn't figure it out until after I beat this game. If you hear a crackling noise, that's my HDMI adapter I bought so I could record this footage. Loud noises cause it to have an aneurysm, and the default audio settings for these games are extremely loud. The PS4 remaster of God of War 3 doesn't have this issue, which is irrelevant because I don't need the adapter for that game. The ferryman tells Kratos that the gods will never release him of his duty and tells him to turn back. Living people aren't welcome in Hades. Offended by this blatant discrimination, Kratos tries to teach the man that alivism is an outdated mentality and he needs to get with the times. But just like many cases like this, it was an impossible task. He will heal the fool and shoot you with a blast that kills you instantly. He drops you into the river Styx and you wake up chained to a wall. Who chained you here? I don't know actually, we're not supposed to ask questions. After breaking free, you proceed onward to find out that this is where the Titans have been imprisoned. It's here that you'll find your dollar store Thanos gauntlet, the Gauntlet of Zeus, a weapon that really packs a punch. Seriously though, this thing is one of the better alternate weapons in the series, and there's one equally as great in Ghost of Sparta. Ready at Dawn did a great job with some of these weapons, although the games do suffer in other areas. Later on, you see that Atlas has been freed and now need to set out to find him. Kratos climbs out of the Tartarus depths and makes his way back to the ferry bell. Armed with an arm that is much stronger than a regular arm, it's time for a rematch with Charon. With your new golden glove, you can destroy the pillars that power the blast that defeated you last time. The rest of the fight is just like your mom. Easy. As you sail to the other end of the river, Kratos sees his daughter standing at the harbor. The narrator says that all the years serving the gods didn't ease his pain any, and he now has a chance to see his daughter again. We chase after her into the Temple of Persephone, where you can read about her history. For those of you watching right now who aren't familiar with her story, she was kidnapped by Hades and forced to marry him. Her mother consulted Olympus, who then consulted the Sisters of Fate to try and have her released. They agreed, but said that she wasn't allowed to bring anything from the underworld with her, including the food. Hades gave her some pomegranate seeds to eat, which she did because she wasn't aware of the deal. Because of this, she's partially bound to the underworld. She is only allowed to return to the surface for half a year and needs to return to Hades for just as long. During the time she's gone, her mother doesn't allow any plants to grow until she returns. This is how the Greeks would rationalize the seasons, with spring being when she returns and fall being when she leaves. Finally, you find yourself in the groves of Persephone. Kratos starts shouting at Kellogg, asking where Sean is. That's a Fallout 4 reference for the much larger chunk of you who probably haven't played that game. Persephone tells him that she's in the Elysium Fields and that he needs to release his weapons into this magic tree in order to enter. This drains all your weapons and upgrades. By this point, Kratos has entirely given up on his quest to save Helios and goes to see his daughter, which I think is hard to fault him for. It's selfish, yes, but I think anyone would do the same if they were in his position. Persephone reveals that she's the one who released Atlas, and they're going to use Helios' power to destroy the pillar that holds up the worlds. This would destroy the overworld, Hades, and Elysium. Why did she tell you this? I don't know actually, we're not supposed to ask questions. This next scene is what I consider to be one of the most important to Kratos' character arc, so let me go into a little more detail than usual. When Kratos relinquished his weapons into the tree earlier, he was regaining the humanity he lost while serving Ares, but he was also giving up his strength. Persephone feels betrayed by the gods and wants to see them destroyed. Just like many millennials, she hates her life and she's in a loveless marriage. Her plan was to free Atlas, kidnap Helios, and use the power of the sun to tear down the pillar. By luring Kratos to Elysium to see his daughter, she's essentially prevented you from directly interfering. I feel like this could have been better conveyed than her pretending to be Dr. Doofenshmirtz for a moment and revealing her entire plan to the one person who's in a position to stop them. Regardless, this leaves him with only two choices. Stay with his daughter for the short amount of time that they have left, or leave her again so that she can continue to live. So, in probably the saddest QuickTime event in the entire franchise, you need to push her away as she begs you not to leave. Then, as if that wasn't bad enough, you need to murder the souls of Elysium in front of her so you can once again lose your humanity and regain your weapons and upgrades. Kratos now needs to lead the one person he loves most to save the ungrateful gods who refuse to lift a finger towards helping him live in some semblance of peace. You can accuse Kratos of being selfish and uncaring of anybody around him, but you can't accuse him of not loving his family. And seeing this man actually happy for the first and only time in the first 6 of these games, just for him to once again saddle up and save the gods from extinction goes a long way towards showing why he's so pissed off all the time. This has even more impact with the context that was added in Ascension, with him setting out specifically to rectify the damage he'd done and eventually becoming a slave to the gods around him. You really can't blame him for how he acts when you see gods like Persephone, somebody who should relate to him the most, using him just like Olympus does. I'm going to spoil the rest of the franchise and say that this is the last time Kratos will ever see Calliope, and this is the last thing she'll ever remember him as, a murderous monster leaving her alone all over again. What comes next is a pretty good looking cutscene as Persephone carries us to the top of this tower holding the worlds together. Honestly, the presentation is pretty good, but it's not fun seeing it every time you want to fight the boss. The checkpoint is at the save spot right before, and you can't skip it. This wouldn't be a big deal if this wasn't the toughest fight in the entire game, and such a spike in difficulty that it would have caught me off guard if I didn't remember how hard it was from my first playthrough. After punching through her chest like Liu Kang, the tower collapses, and Atlas is left holding up the worlds. Atlas tells Kratos that the gods will never keep their promise to him, and Kratos says that serving the gods is his only hope for peace. We get one more cutscene after the credits showing Kratos collapsing and falling off the chariot. Helios and Athena come by to take your toys because we're not allowed to have any fun. Helios asks if they should help him, and Athena says this:
He'll live. They must.
There's been a lot of speculation about who she's talking about when she says, they must. The answer was given by the game director of our next game, Ghost of Sparta. If Chains of Olympus has what I consider to be the most important moments for Kratos' character in the prequels, then Ghost of Sparta has some of the most important in the sequels. I remember the ending of this game much more fondly than any of the other games because I just thought it was that good. Just like the last section, I will probably go into too much detail about it when we get there. Before we begin, I want to talk about my combat experience with this game. I didn't think it would need a section like this, but if I were ranking the games for how frustrating they are, this game would land in 3rd place. I'll try to make it quick. I think that despite this game having one of the most compelling stories, it has some of the worst combat. The biggest reason is that Kratos moves way too slow in this game. The dodge is slow, the recovery animations are slow, everything is slow. Let's start with that first point. Your dodge is slower and has less distance than any games besides Chains of Olympus. The combat in this game is essentially identical to that one, except it's more difficult and there's much more tracking during enemy attacks. The reason that this is bad is that the combination of more tracking with slower dodging almost always means you're going to get hit. I still wouldn't call this combat hard, not even close. It's much easier than Ascension in almost every way, except whereas Ascension had frustrating combat because things seldom worked the way they were supposed to, Ghost of Sparta has frustrating combat because of a lack of iframes when you desperately need them. Here's an example. Every game gives you invincibility while using magic, but only a few of them cut off your iframes before you regain control of Kratos. This happened in Ascension, and it happens again here, except Ghost of Sparta takes this one step further by not giving you invincibility when you get knocked down and giving you a painstakingly slow recovery animation that can sometimes last a full 2 seconds. I went back and tested this when I got to this part of the script, and you can roll out of these animations, but there's a delay and you can still get hit, so the issue stands. If you're fighting enemies like the Eagles, then they can continue to attack you when you don't have control of Kratos, and if you're unlucky, this can sometimes immediately stagger you when you do gain control of him. I think these issues are amplified in this game because you have no AoE magic that can be used for some temporary invincibility while you catch your breath. The only magic ability you can do this with is the Eye of Atlantis, and it only works on single targets. Even with it fully upgraded, the extra arcs do little to help in a crowd. What results is a frustrating combat system when you're taking more hits than you feel like you deserve because you overestimated how far you can dodge. Ironically, I didn't find these things as difficult after playing all 6 games back to back, but for a regular playthrough there's going to be some frustration. Some attacks land sooner than the model makes it appear, so you need to block earlier than you think in order to get the parry. It's not sloppy, but it's far from refined for me to not discuss it. These issues were present in Chains of Olympus, but attacks did less damage in that game, and it was just too easy to stagger lock enemies for you to really notice. For one final criticism before I move on, these bars have enough space to where an adult obese man could fit between them, yet they still block your way. This bothers me, and I want it to bother you too. The game begins directly after the end of the first game, with Kratos sitting on the throne as the new god of war. He receives a vision from his mother calling out for help, and he knew this was more than the usual vision. This sends him to Atlantis looking for answers, and Athena pleads with him to turn back, telling him it was just a dream.
The visions still haunt me, Athena. The visions you promised to take away.
Shortly after, your ship is boarded by fishmen, and the soldiers say there is a sea monster attacking the fleet. The beast, which turns out to be a Scylla, then wrecks your ship and you need to give it the old square square triangle until that big circle button appears. You will then need to fight your way through Atlantis. I got flung by a Minotaur and caught by the Scylla, and I'm only mentioning this because I'm 100% sure that isn't how this event was scripted, but it gave me a mighty startle regardless. You'll pass by the temple of Thanatos, the god of death, on your way to find Kratos' mother. Beyond the doors is the way to the domain of death, where no god or mortal has dared to set foot in. You come to another temple sometime later, and when you step through the doors, you enter a moment from the past. You witness Kratos as a child with his brother Deimos, then make your way to his mother. She tells Kratos that Deimos is still alive and being held in the domain of death. Kratos' father forbade her from telling the truth, so he went his whole life believing that Deimos was dead. Understandably upset, he demands to know who his father is and looks shocked after she whispers it to him. Most of you know who his father is, but I won't spoil it for anybody who doesn't, since it's essential to this game's story. After revealing the truth, his mother turns into a monster and you're forced to fight her. Once you put her down, all that's left is Kratos' mother, who tells him that she's now free of her imprisonment, and then dies. Forced to kill his own mother, Kratos is pushed to the verge of insanity. The only thing driving him by this point is rage and the will to find his brother. Your first stop is the Temple of Ares in Sparta, so that's where you head off to. You get your first magic ability, the Eye of Atlantis. It sucks. All the magic in this game sucks. Once outside, the Scylla comes back and drags you underwater. Kratos channels some of that rage by frying his face with lava the second it spits him out. Proceeding forward, the Mountain Keeper, Lanius, tells you not to go any further or you'll bring the mountain down on everybody. In the next room, you'll see the Titan Thera being held here. She tells Kratos that if he frees her, then she'll give him some of her power, but you instead shove your blades into her chest and take it anyways. This fire power-up is a less refined version of how the system works in Ascension, which may sound like it's shit, but I actually think it works really well. You hold R1 to power up your blades, which will drain a new meter that regenerates over time. There are certain enemies that can only be damaged by the fire, but you can freely apply or cancel this buff by holding or releasing the button at any time, similar to how you could switch powers in Ascension without interruption. Taking Thera's power has angered her, causing the mountain to shake. There are various screws in parts of the volcano to prevent it from erupting, but they're in the way so you just break them. You can probably see what's going to happen to Atlantis. The Scylla comes back to harass you one last time before you shove its face into a drill, killing it for good. This was enough to destabilize the mountain and begin an eruption, effectively causing Atlantis to sink. Kratos doesn't care, and neither should we, so it's time to move on. I decided to kill all the civilians I passed since a quick death by Spartan is much better than drowning, and these nice enemies were kind enough to help me out with that. You make your way to the Temple of Athena where Kratos confronts her about what he learned, and it goes like this.
Athena! You lied to me! The gods lied to me! My brother lives. He lives! Athena!
Don't let your rage blind you, Kratos. There is much you do not know. Be warned. They will all try to stab you.
I think that went well. In the next area, you come to a group of soldiers who are badly mutilated. They are only here to give a message to Kratos. Death is waiting for him. You can also see that your actions in the mountain have had a much wider effect than you may have thought. Not only is Atlantis sinking, but the volcano is destroying the city of Heraklion as well. You'll find the Gravedigger from the first game, who admonishes Kratos for his actions and tells him that he should feel honored to have been raised to the status of a god. Kratos says that he didn't ask for Ares' throne and he's only concerned about finding his brother. The Digger tells him to turn back while he can, but we all know that isn't going to happen. You will eventually find yourself out of the city and start heading towards the mountains. It's here that we get our first look at whoever led the message with those dead soldiers. After many fights, you will come to Erinys, the daughter of Thanatos. She tries to kill you, but I know how to parry. You rip off her wings, and then she turns into a giant bird and flies away. Apparently, between the time I ripped off her first set and crushed this hawk's skull, she grew a new set. I had to rewatch this about 4 times to find out what happened here. She channels her inner Boeing 737 MAX and falls out of the sky. You rip off her backup wings and then show her just how much bitches with annoying birds aren't welcome here. Adding another tally to your bitches with annoying birds that I've laid the fuck out whiteboard hanging in the break room of your office. You get your new magic ability, it sucks, and you make it to your destination in one piece. Welcome to Sparta. It's honestly nice to be in a city where people don't scream and run away at the sight of you. There's a brothel not too far in too, because this is a God of War game. You get another flashback to the events of the past and get to watch as Olympus invaded Sparta to kidnap Deimos. It was foretold that a marked warrior would destroy Olympus, and Deimos' birthmarks made them believe it was him. You see 2 shaded figures take him away. This is obviously Athena and Ares, even though you can't see their face. Ares wanted to kill Kratos and Athena stopped him. You pass through the jails where one of the men escapes from their cell and calls Kratos an imposter, claiming that Ares is the true god of war. After killing him for being a heretic, you leave Sparta and proceed to the Temple of Ares. The Spartans are tearing down their statues of Ares to make one of Kratos. The man in charge says he has something for you and leaves to go get it. Inside the temple, you fight the ghost of a young Kratos and get the skull of Charis. It's now time to return to Atlantis and enter the domain of death. The Spartan from before gives Kratos his old weapons from before he served Ares. The arms of Sparta are another great set of secondary weapons since you can throw an infinite amount of spears to pick off archers. You can block while walking, and the shield protects against elemental hazards, which will be used for some puzzles later. Taking another route through the mountains from before, you can find yourself in the Shrine of Boreas, where you'll get the Horn of Boreas. It sucks. Thanatos gives us a call through a dead body and warns us again to turn back. I'm pretty sure calling from another dimension is considered a long-distance call, and he knows that shit costs money. In the next area, you run into Midas, the king of Macedonia. Everything he touches turns to gold, which caused him to lose his mind after accidentally turning his daughter into solid gold. You forcibly drag him to a lake of lava and throw him into it, which kills him and turns him into gold simultaneously. Out of the caverns, you take a ship and sail into the vortex. The ship captain stupidly prays to Poseidon and everybody starts getting smitten. Poseidon tells Kratos that he won't forget what has happened here, and then we move on. Athena shows up later to once again tell you to turn back. It's here that Kratos realizes that Athena was there the day that they took Deimos.
You were there. Why? Why did you help him?
I was there for you, Kratos. You had to be saved.
You should have saved him. I should have saved him.
There is more to this than you could possibly know, Kratos.
Lies and riddles. That's all you give me, Athena. I will save my brother, and you will stay out of my way.
Once he's done telling her off, you move on. Lanius from before is blocking your way, so you end his life. Let this be a lesson to you kids. Death is a preferable alternative to blocking somebody's way. I pity the man that finds himself blocking a door I'm trying to walk through, because I know that his spine will make a fine addition to my collection. After all this time, you make your way inside the domain of death, which is more of a purgatory than the name suggests. After much time in the section of Candyland that was cut due to the number of dead bodies that cluttered the game board, you find Deimos. You cut him down, and I think I'll just let this one play out for itself.
You are safe now. Safe! You let this happen to me. You were supposed to protect me. Did you think I would forget? Did you think I would forgive? I will never forgive you, brother.
I think that went well. This turns into a classic case of winning the gameplay or losing the cutscene. Thanatos carries Deimos off, and even though he just tried to kill Kratos, he doesn't hesitate to chase after him. He limps toward the portal and returns to the overworld to save Deimos again. You save him from falling off a ledge, and apparently he can forgive because he just does. You give him the arms of Sparta, and the two of you run off to kill Thanatos. He helps you in the battle, but eventually sustains heavy injuries. This enrages Kratos so much that you get infinite fire for the rest of the fight. Eventually, you do kill him, but Deimos died in the process. As you slowly carry him up the cliffs, the Gravedigger had already made a spot for him. Kratos goes over to the cliff and considers committing suicide, just like in the first game. The rest of the cutscene I'll play out.
By the gods, what have I become?
Death, the destroyer of worlds.
It is done. You have let go of that which made you mortal. Your ties to this world are severed. You are ready to be a god.
Is this all a game to you, Athena? It is not over, Athena. The gods will pay for this.
Forgive me, brother.
With the loss of his brother by the hands of the gods, Kratos' hatred towards them will only get worse from here. This is why Athena made that comment at the end of Chains of Olympus. The game director of Ghost of Sparta confirmed that when she says they, she's referring to both Kratos and Deimos. But there's still one more loose end to tie up. Who is the Gravedigger? Well, you may be surprised to learn that it's Zeus in disguise. He has used this alter ego to silently watch over Kratos since his task to kill Ares, and it shows that he does care for Kratos more than it may appear. Of course, that's how it comes off at first, but to me it says the complete opposite. Zeus probably does care about Kratos in his own way, but he in no way treats him like a son. If Zeus truly cared about him, he would have had some interaction with him by now, face to face. Not to imply that Zeus is a good father, considering how Hercules feels in God of War 3, but that's my point. I don't think that Zeus deserves any amount of pity or sympathy for what Kratos is about to do, and I'll go into more detail at that section between God of War 2 and 3 where I take a deeper look at Kratos' character over the course of these games, and I'll even bring it back up when discussing his relationship with Atreus. God of War 2, intro stuff, combat has problems. Let's skip the bitching and get straight to the story because I think I've made my point by now. There's little difference between this game and the first, and I didn't have all that much fun. The game opens with Kratos conquering cities in the name of Sparta. Athena shows up to tell him that Olympus is getting tired of his shit and that she won't be able to protect him if he continues. He does anyways and begins to sack Rhodes. A giant owl zaps him and reduces him back to normal size, and then zaps the Colossus of Rhodes and brings it to life. Kratos thinks that Athena is responsible and says that she'll pay for conspiring against him. You'll fight the giant statue multiple times before Zeus offers the Blade of Olympus, telling Kratos to channel his remaining godhood into it, stripping him of all his powers besides his usual combat ability. You use the blade to defeat the Colossus, and Kratos takes the time to gloat and doesn't see the hand falling onto him. Since he's mortal again, this almost kills him, and the Spartan soldiers gather around and are confused to see him struggling to walk. In a surprising twist that nobody could see coming, the giant owl turns out to be Zeus, who executes Kratos when he refuses to submit and then destroys the entire Spartan army.
Even now, as you draw your last breath, you continue to defy me?
The same Zeus that sent mortal Kratos to kill Ares and forbade Athena from defending her own city directly intervenes and stops Kratos from destroying this one. As Kratos descends into Hades, he gets a recap of everything he's done. In these visions, you hear the narrator from all these games telling him to fight. This turns out to be the Titan Gaia, that pledges to help him defeat Zeus if he agrees to fight for his life. And so, he literally defies death by climbing back to the surface. Kratos finds a single living soldier and tells him to return to Sparta. A Pegasus appears out of nowhere, and Gaia tells you to find the Sisters of Fate and travel back in time to the moment Zeus killed Kratos. You ride the Pegasus to one of the last living Titans, and Gaia says he can help. Once you find him, you rip a magical bow out of his eye, which renders him partially blind. This part has always struck me as odd because it never really made sense why Gaia is just okay with you blinding her friend. You'd think she would at least comment on what happened, but it's never brought up. You release your Pegasus and fly to the Island of Creation. If you thought that God of War 1 spent too much time in a single place with Pandora's Temple, you will be both relieved and frustrated to know that God of War 2 does the exact same thing, but much better. The Island of Creation is, as the name states, an entire island. You'll spend 90% of your time on this island, but there are enough changes in scenery for you to feel like you're actually making some progress along the way. It still has the potential to get monotonous and fatiguing like the first game, but I personally didn't feel that way on this playthrough. That being said, I am going to speed through most of this game because it's 12 hours long and not all of it is worth talking about, it's just more of the same. Gaia tells Kratos why she's helping him, so it's time for the obligatory tragic backstory. Kronos, the Titan, heard a prophecy that his children would kill him. Instead of simply not having any children, he instead decided that he was going to imprison them in his stomach. Zeus's mother didn't want to give up her last child, so she had him taken away and fooled Kronos into eating some rocks instead. Gaia raised Zeus, but he eventually wanted to rise up and save the rest of his family from Kronos, and then decided to punish all the Titans for what happened to his family. I don't really know how Kronos could possibly have a child with a woman 1,000th of his size. In the actual mythology, she was a Titan, so it makes sense there, but it doesn't seem possible unless... Rainy days aside, you move on and try to find a way to the greater island from where you landed when your Pegasus was killed. Oh, by the way, your Pegasus was killed. This has you go into the 4 large horses, the steeds of time. You run into Theseus, who laughs at you.
What a story, Mark.
You do what Kratos does and bash his face in with a door after stealing his key. The fight is pretty basic, so I don't feel the need to comment on it much. After unhinging all 4 of the steeds and whipping them a bit with your chains, they activate and pull the entire island forward so you can reach it from where you started. You return to a different part of the temple than where you left, and you will acquire the Amulet of Fates. Unlike the Amulet of Ouroboros, this slows time instead of controlling it, and you can only use it within a certain range. Once you rise up to the statue, the Sisters of Fate speak to Kratos and tell him that there's no way to defy them, and that he will never find peace for what he's become. Kratos responds the way he always does, with violence, and you move on. You have a quick combat section and a short puzzle to remove this barrier, then move deeper into the island. Gaia tells you to gain control of the Threads of Fate so you can travel back in time and defeat Zeus, and you get attacked by the barbarian king that Kratos killed right after becoming Ares' servant. He has apparently fought his way out of hell and is conveniently also searching for the Sisters of Fate at the exact same time you are so he can try and kill you. I said I'm not going to talk a lot about combat, so all I want to say is that I take personal offense when a game asks me if I'd like to lower the difficulty. I don't want your pity, just let me reload, damn it. Games like Bloodborne have trained me to keep trying until I get things right, and I get insulted every time the screen pops up. I see you're having a tough time beating this boss. Maybe you bit off a bit more than you could chew by choosing hard mode. You should just go ahead and switch to easy mode for this part. Only combat will be affected by this change. After all, you clearly need all the help you can get. Alright, fuck you too, buddy. Once he's dead, you get the Barbarian Hammer, and it's useless. Eustace would be ashamed of how useless this mallet is. You then come to the Temple of Uriel. I am very eager to get to my prize here because I am very frustrated that they locked your ability to parry behind an item that comes several hours into the game. Somehow this Gorgon killed me without attacking me while I was frozen, and I wanted to share it with you. You kill a Cerberus with a staggering amount of health and get the Golden Fleece. After this is a fight with Uriel, another Gorgon queen in another area of the temple. You get the head of Uriel, which I did not find as useful as Medusa's gaze. You travel through some areas and climb a spiral staircase to come up to where the magic barrier was. There's a room with a door shooting fireballs that you can now deflect and break open. After solving some puzzles, you'll run into Perseus, who thinks that killing you will grant him an audience with the Sisters of Fate. Spoiler, it doesn't. In the next area, you'll find the Spear of Destiny. Spear of Destiny bad. Later on, you'll run into Icarus, and as you can see, Icarus lives. Fun fact, I am a Periphery fan, and they opened with this song when I saw them live in Nashville back in 2017. I have a live recording of this, and you don't, and I wanted to gloat. Icarus pulls Kratos into a bottomless pit and gets his wings ripped off as a result. You land near our old friend Atlas and spend some time climbing to his hand. He's not happy to see you, but Kratos convinces him that he isn't here to fight. He tells you about the war between the Titans and the gods, and you see that Atlas had his soul reaped by Hades while trying to save Kronos. This doesn't kill him though, surprisingly. Zeus created the Blade of Olympus and banished the Titans to the pits of Tartarus. Atlas admonishes Kratos for stopping him in the events of the Chains of Olympus, but gives you the Atlas Quake ability and puts you back to the surface. You then make it to the Palace of the Fates. You will eventually come to a room with a book you can't read. This requires a very frustrating task of protecting the translator while a shit ton of enemies spawn in to kill you both. Escort missions suck. Finally, he reads the book and you sacrifice him to gain an audience with the Sisters of Fate. One of the sisters shows up and says that you're not quite ready for an audience, and then in the next room they try to kill you. Athena contacts you through a statue and once again tells you that you don't know what you're doing and you need to turn back. The next book reader is a bit more interesting. He tries to kill himself in order to prevent you from reaching the Sisters of Fate, but there's a mirror that lets you travel back in time to the moment before he died. You use the amulet to slow time so you can grab him before he jumps and make him read the book. This once again summons one of the sisters to speak with you, and again she tells you to do something else first. I'm not sure if these messages are pre-recorded or something, but she's being awfully helpful for somebody who keeps trying to kill us. So here's how this goes. I fight through these puzzle chambers for 30 minutes to get to the Phoenix Ashes. I use all my magic in the area before and barely pulled through on my second try. I come to the next room and this is the first thing that happens. Where do you think the checkpoint is? Surely it's right as the fight begins, right? Wrong. It's before you even push the Phoenix Ashes into the slot. Every time you die, you will need to do this mundane 15-second task every single attempt. This is my 5th game, and I've been dealing with frustrating checkpoints the entire time. I want you to share my pain. Anyways, you revive the Phoenix and use the Horn of Boreas to free it from its lava trap. You'll come to a dark room where there's just one soldier. You fight him before eventually impaling him in the chest and jumping out the window. The soldier turns out to be the same one from the beginning. Kratos asks why he isn't in Sparta, and he tells you that Zeus appeared and destroyed the city, and that he's the last Spartan alive. He then succumbs to his injuries, and I think Kratos takes this quite well. A Kraken appears and Kratos doesn't attack when you press the button. The Kraken grabs him and Kratos blacks out, then sees a vision of his wife, but it is obviously Gaia speaking to him. For the first time in any of these games, he has a moment of insecurity believing that he can't defeat the gods, and Gaia reassures him, telling him to just get really pissed off. Do you get the ever so slight feeling you're currently being manipulated by the Titans? It works anyways, and Kratos is able to burn the Kraken by pretending he's shooting a commercial for Angry Jack's Shell Emporium.
Seething with rage!
This Kraken fight is less epic than the Charybdis fight in Ascension, but it's still alright. You beat the Phoenix into submission and ride it to the peak of the mountain to meet the Sisters of Fate. You will come to the throne of Lachesis, the first sister of Fate. She tells you nobody can change their destiny and that the only reason you've come this far is because she's let you. She basically says that it's not your destiny to kill Zeus, so they aren't going to let you. This begins possibly the easiest boss fight I've had in this game, but it's mostly because I know how to parry well. The first phase has you fighting Lachesis, then the second fate, Atropos, drags you back in time and tries to destroy the sword that you used to defeat Ares in the first game. Once you defeat her, you get back to the throne room. You shatter the mirrors in an attempt to trap Atropos in the past, but it would be cruel to leave her there alone, so you throw Lachesis in there to keep her company. Now that the official boss fight is over, we can move on to the third fate, Clotho. You will fight through the final gauntlet of the game, do some puzzles, and then face off with the final sister who reminds me of my middle school bus driver. Sorry, Miss Wilma. This is another puzzle boss, and it may take longer than you think to even know what to do. Once you kill her, you can now control fate itself. You travel back in time to the moment Zeus killed you in order to change your fate. You then begin your final battle with Zeus. Just like any final boss should be, Zeus is a very tough endurance fight. I did die one time because my monitor decided to shut off, so that's fun. Just like the Ares fight, there's a lot to learn and it can be a lot of fun. Kratos lays a trap that Zeus stupidly falls for where he says he surrenders, which means you kick his ass and stab him a couple of times with the blade of Olympus. Athena intervenes to try and stop Kratos from finishing the job, and she jumps in front of Zeus to save him. Kratos is naturally upset about this, and with her dying breath, Athena says that Kratos needs to end the cycle of violence, and that destroying Zeus will destroy Olympus. She also tells him that every god will come against him now, to which Kratos says this.
If all on Olympus would deny me my vengeance, then all on Olympus will die. I have lived in the shadow of the gods for long enough. The time of the gods has come to an end.
Returning to the present, you once again go back in time, except this time to save the Titans from the end of the Great War. The game ends with Zeus rallying the gods at Olympus as the Titans begin their assault, and that's the end of God of War 2. It may seem like I didn't really talk much about it, and that's because there wasn't anything to say that wasn't said in the first game section. All the issues are pretty much identical, and there was only a baby step between the two. I also figured that most of you are getting tired of hearing a combat analysis at the start of every section, so I decided that retreading the same ground wouldn't be worth the time. There's a lot to say about the next game, and I don't have any reason to try and pad the length of this video. That being said, let's pad the length of this video and recap everything that has happened so far. Before we move on to God of War 3, I want to talk about everything that has been crucial to Kratos' character arc. Kratos gave his life to Ares in order to prevent his death, but ended up being put to work as his personal assassin. He was tricked into murdering his wife and daughter, he ripped and tore his way out of his oath with Ares, and turned to the gods of Olympus for redemption, just to end up being used by them just as much as he was by Ares. After finally getting a chance to see his daughter again, he is immediately forced to murder innocent people in front of her and then abandon her, all while she begs him not to leave. He had to give up the one thing he loved most once again because another Olympian god decided to try and destroy the world just to get out of her marriage, and this was the only way that his daughter could continue to live. Saving Olympus was secondary to saving his daughter's life. I neglected to mention in my Chains of Olympus section that there is some great commentary here on how women are vile and cannot be trusted, and that marriage truly is a contract of death. Any bachelors watching should pay close attention to Persephone's actions because your world could be what comes crumbling down next. I sincerely hope I don't need to mention that I'm joking here, but in case anybody couldn't tell, here it is. After 10 years of servitude, all the while being haunted with visions and nightmares of his past, Athena finally offers him forgiveness for his sins if he will kill Ares and save Athens. This involves him once again putting his life on the line because the all-powerful gods couldn't be bothered to lift a finger against a single god that was threatening their authority. It's more complicated than that, but with the information we have now, this is how it looks from Kratos' perspective. He serves the gods faithfully in their request and gets told that only his sins would be forgiven, and that relieving him of his nightmares was never part of the deal. He had been manipulated by the gods once again, and his request was not honored. Kratos attempts to kill himself, but the gods won't even let him end his own life, a decision that they will surely come to regret. Sometime later, Kratos receives a vision of his mother calling out to him. He immediately sets sail to find her, all the while Athena tells him that it's just a dream and he shouldn't worry about it. He finds his mother, and she tells him that his brother is still alive, then tells him that Zeus is his father. This inflicts a curse on her where she turns into a monster and Kratos is forced to kill her. Once again, the gods have cost him somebody that he loved. He sets out to release his brother from the domain of death, all the while Athena keeps treating him like an ignorant child. You don't know what you're doing, you don't have all the details, just blindly trust us and everything will be okay. Don't think for yourself, Kratos, you can't be trusted to be anything more than a tool. It then comes out that Athena was involved in capturing his brother, showing that Olympus has been meddling in his life since he was a child. He finds his brother, sinking Atlantis in the process, and is met with nothing but resentment because he was unable to protect him. He does manage to forgive Kratos after he saves his life, but loses him in the fight with Thanatos, another god that has taken somebody he loves. Athena treats this like it was all just a test, and it looks to me like she is about to relieve him of his nightmares for real this time. They wouldn't do what they promised when they promised it, but now that they have effectively wiped out Kratos' entire family, they're ready to budge and give him what he wants. Probably out of fear that they may have pushed him over the edge this time. One last effort to appease the monster they created before he goes his own way. Is it any surprise that he doesn't accept it? She tried to stop him at every given opportunity when it would have been much easier to just let Deimos go. But no, Olympus always has to take priority in their eyes. I believe that Athena cared about Kratos the most out of all of them, but her loyalty was always to Olympus first, and Kratos' loyalty was always to his family, then eventually himself when there was nobody left. It's no wonder that Kratos turned his support to Sparta, his last semblance of family and his brothers in arms, and started conquering the other cities. All of a sudden, Ares' defiance of the gods is more relatable, but I wouldn't go as far as to say that he's sympathetic for it. Finally, Zeus steps in to stop him. The same god who wouldn't stop Ares is going to stop Kratos, and he kills him in the process. With the help of the Titan Gaia, Kratos travels to the Sisters of Fate and manages to kill them all. Just think about that for a second. This man is so strong that he fought the Arbiters of Fate and won. He fights Zeus, but once again Athena intervenes, this time sacrificing her life. Despite their shaky relationship, Kratos didn't want Athena dead. She may have been a glorified customer support agent, but he did care about her. You know the rest from here, but I wanted to lay all this out because it is all coming to a head in the next game, and it's important to know how things have escalated to this point. Kratos already paid the ultimate price for his oath to Ares. He's paid that price multiple times, and he would have been the greatest asset to Olympus if they would have simply treated him like an equal. Zeus cared enough about Kratos to watch over him during his journeys, but he didn't care enough to treat him like family. Ares rose up because Zeus always showed favor to Athena, and Kratos rose up because the gods kept taking and taking, but couldn't be bothered to let him go a single day without reliving the moment that he killed his family. I'm going to spoil things now and say the gods will never take responsibility for what they did, and they're responsible for a lot of what has happened here. The next game starts exactly where the last one ended. Zeus has convened the gods just as Kratos and the Titans begin their assault on Olympus. The difference is that we're back on the PS4 because this is the remastered version of the game, and my god does stable frame rate look nice. As Zeus monologues, you can see that Kratos has brought all of Sparta against Olympus alongside him and the Titans. The gods gather around the campfire and start singing that campfire song. That's the CAMPFIRESONG song, for any of you wondering. As you fight on the Titan Gaia, you start getting harassed by a water horse spider monster. It's honestly a pretty epic first boss, and you'll get to fight it twice. Around the same time, you start to wonder why it won't die, you see what it's connected to. Poseidon has created a Titan vessel of his own, and these water horses are all connected to it. You have one final showdown with Poseidon, and the end result is as awesome as it is brutal. Poseidon warns Kratos that the end of Olympus would mean the end of the world, and then you beat him to death from his perspective. Kratos and Gaia make their way to Zeus, but are blasted off of the peak of Olympus. Kratos begins to lose his grip, and Gaia refuses to help him.
Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation.
Your powers are drained from you by the souls in the river Styx and your blades are ruined. Athena appears in spirit form to speak to Kratos. She claims that sacrificing herself for Zeus has elevated her to a higher existence, something above Olympus itself. She repairs the blades as a token of goodwill and tells you to seek the flame of Olympus to gain the power to kill Zeus. This always struck me as odd because we just killed Poseidon not even 5 minutes ago and whooped Zeus's ass in the last game, so what more could Kratos possibly need to kill him? There is an answer, but it's tangled up in that bullshit I've mentioned from before. You fight your way through the underworld and eventually come to the judges of the underworld, 3 statues that judge the souls of those wishing to enter Elysium. After a while, you will come to a statue where a little girl mistakes you for her father. Kratos mistakes her for his daughter, but quickly realizes it isn't her. Hades taunts Kratos for a minute, and then you move on. There are several notes here that are from unnamed individuals, one of which is from a little girl who recounts the events of Kratos burning the village of Athena worshippers and that the judges have told her to move on to Elysium, which is obviously Calliope, and another not too long after of a mother who speaks of how she failed to raise her son and that everybody who gets around him dies, his wife, his daughter, his brother, and now her. This is obviously Callisto from Ghost of Sparta speaking about Kratos, but it goes one step further when she asks for her to be tortured for his sins and him granted redemption. There's also a reference to the boat captain from the first game, who also made an appearance during the Barbarian King fight in the second game, but I didn't mention it then.
No, not you again!
I'm going to say I wanted to wait until now, but really I just didn't think it was important enough to bring up until now. I like these little Easter eggs nodding at the other games, and I just wanted to share them. Usually whenever there's a spin-off title, it's never acknowledged in the main lineups, and it's good for Santa Monica to recognize the PSP games as canon, especially when Ghost of Sparta was released 9 months after 3. What's really cool is this Elden Ring reference not too long after. I'm sure at least one of you watching got that joke and you've never rolled your eyes harder in your life. In the next area, you'll meet Hephaestus. He tells Kratos that he's the reason that he lives in torment. He also says that touching the flame of Olympus will kill you. We'll be seeing more of this giant load, so I'd get used to his repulsive appearance soon if I were you. You find another statue with the little girl, and she says that she needs you to free her. Kratos declines, because of course he does, and you reclaim the Blade of Olympus. You burn down the bramble blocking the way to Hades' domain, and bring the newspaper to his fire puppers when they try to be big bitey boys and give you a mighty chompin'. You move into the palace of Hades, and he tells you to make yourself at home. You do so by smashing his statue with the corpse of his dead wife. Once inside, Hades recounts all the wonderful memories he has of you, like how you killed Athena, Poseidon, and of course Persephone. He's so overwhelmed with emotion that he tries to reap your soul so he can cherish it forever. Unfortunately, Kratos is wearing his anti-sea rhinoceros underpants, so it doesn't go quite according to plan. This is probably my favorite boss fight in the entire franchise, but I'm a sucker for one-on-one duels. When I played a lot of For Honor, back when that game was fun, I almost exclusively did duels.
Victory!
After winning your match of tug-of-war in hell, you get the claws of Hades. You finally get a good look at Satan himself, and just look at the man. He's hideous. If I were Persephone, I'd probably want to kill everyone in the world too. The only thing worse than being married to Hades is thinking that a Twitch thought means it when she says she appreciates you. In any case, you reap Hades' soul, and the souls of the dead escape the underworld and run rampant in the world above. The claws of Hades are useful, but you can only switch weapons at the end of a combo or by blocking and pressing X. This is a bit of a shame, but that's to be expected when I played Ascension, the last of its kind in the franchise, at the beginning of the project. Still, I prefer the fluidity that it offered with weapon swapping. You make it back to Hephaestus, and he begins his obligatory tragic backstory. He says the day that Kratos killed Ares was when Zeus became a tyrant. He tortured Hephaestus and took his daughter, Pandora. He asked Kratos to rescue Pandora, and he declines.
Your child is not my concern.
But surely you can understand. You were once a father, too.
You make your way to the Hyperion Gate that was at the beginning of the level. Keep in mind that Hephaestus said that only somebody with the soul of a god can enter one, and now that Kratos has Hades' soul, he's allowed through. This begs a question that is going to come up in 2018. At what point did Kratos regain his godhood? Some would say that it happens now, and because he has Hades' soul, he has returned to full god status. This would also beg the question that if Hades reaped Atlas' soul, would that technically make him a titan? Well, if size is of any concern, because any man would tell you that it does matter, then you could make the argument that he grew larger than he appears in God of War 2 because of this. But at the same time, Hephaestus is an Olympian and he isn't a titan. He's the son of Hera, which is Zeus' wife, and just look at him, he's huge. For the sake of argument, let's just say that this is not when Kratos regains his godhood, and that possessing Hades' soul simply grants him control of the souls of the dead and access through the Hyperion Gates. Kratos stops and considers going out and looking for his daughter. This isn't actually said in-game, but with what Hephaestus said before you left, and Kratos knowing that Calliope's soul would be released after Hades' death, it's alluded to. Athena tells Kratos to focus on his current mission, and you pass through the gate. Once outside, Gaia asks for help, so you lend a hand by cutting off hers. I'm gonna be honest, I've never liked this part. Gaia chose poorly when she decided not to help Kratos, and she should have known that she couldn't defeat Zeus alone, but I have still never felt comfortable with Kratos calling her a means to an end and cutting her hand off. It would be stupid of him to trust her after what happened, but I've always felt like Gaia wasn't really your enemy and doesn't deserve to be treated like one. In the next area, you shoot down Helios' chariot and cause a Titan to crush him and his steeds, then toss him aside. You make your way to Helios and he tells you that he has not forgotten that he owes you for saving him from Atlas, which by now was more than 10 years ago, and he tells you he'll reward you if you save his life again. Kratos wants to know where the Flame of Olympus is, and Helios refuses to tell him.
Feel the power of the sun!
Helios turns on his brights like a dick, so you stomp his head a few times until he stops. He says that in order to kill Zeus, you need to step into the Flame of Olympus. Kratos doesn't believe this because of what Hephaestus told him, and if you have a weak stomach, you might want to stop watching for the next few seconds. You rip off Helios' head and use it like a flashlight, which causes the sun to go out. Solaire would be very ashamed of our actions. You speak to Pandora and she tells you something is close to catching her. Kratos says once again that he can't help her, and you move on. This didn't strike me as odd until I read it out loud. It's like a little girl saying, "Help, I'm being kidnapped." You just walk past her saying, "It is unwise to trust a stranger." You write a draft up the chain of balance, stab a Titan in the eye for trying to take a swipe at you, and then do the most stressful climb I've ever done in my life. Afterwards is a long endurance fight with no checkpoints, and if you happen to die at the end, you need to start over. In the next area, Hermes taunts Kratos for always killing his family.
I hate when people underestimate my fastness. I'm fast. I'm so fast, you couldn't even comprehend how fast I am.
You climb the chain of balance and come to the Flame of Olympus, and inside is Pandora's box. Athena explains what's going on, but it's only half the story. I'm gonna hold off on talking about it until we get all the details, but for now just know that there is a much stronger power inside the box that Athena says will help you kill Zeus. Hermes comes back to taunt you for being too slow, and if you decide to take a detour, you're given a chance to look at the state of the world. The sky is covered by clouds, the seas rage, and there are storms everywhere. It looks like a complete hellscape, and it reminds me a lot of Twitter. You chase Hermes as he waits pridefully until you get close before running off. You finally do get him when Kratos launches a boulder at the statue he's waiting on while riding it. Up next is the most annoying boss fight I've ever dealt with in a game. For the first time ever, I have absolutely no clue what the developers expect from you. Hermes will occasionally take a pause to catch his breath after being injured by the collapsing statue. If you attack relentlessly, he will hit you with near unavoidable damage. I say near because his moves can be dodged, but not without literally spamming the dodge button. Other than that, they cannot be blocked. After my several failures, I decided to turn to the brave men and women who have recorded their chaos runs, and I am pleased to report that nobody, not one person I watched, won by a fair fight. The majority of videos I watched use a tactic that is referred to as plume whoring, which is when you use the AoE blast of your heavy attack at the end of a combo to do damage from a safe distance. This is what I did, and I took next to no damage. I'm sure it's possible to win this fight the regular way, but it's obvious that this isn't what you're supposed to do. What exactly you are supposed to do, I'm not sure.
But you have your own sense of honor, right, Kratos? And what has that honor brought you? Nothing but nightmares of your failure. Today you may defeat me, but in the end, Kratos, in the end, you'll betray only yourself.
Kratos decides to kick a man while he's down, and what better way to do that than to take his shoes? This kills Hermes in the process and releases a plague into the world, but we got new shoes, so it's okay. You loop back to the upper level of the Flame of Olympus. You solve a quick rhythm puzzle and attempt to open the flame, but the judges from before pull the chain back down. You leave to an open area, and Hera is here drinking, and she seems friendly enough at first. After Kratos mentions Pandora, her attitude changes and she orders to have you killed. This is when Hercules comes in and starts claiming that Zeus always favored Kratos over him. Kratos says this is bullshit and Zeus doesn't have any favorites, but Hercules' jealousy could rival my ex-girlfriend's. This starts the next boss fight, and it's tied with Hades as my favorite. Instead of being a one-on-one, you need to fight both Hercules and his army of minions. Eventually, he will call them off and fight you solo, which results in him stopping to brag to Hera as she watches it all unfold. This obviously backfires, and you get control of the Nemean Cestus. With them, you go into the easiest part of the fight, and Hercules tries to lift the entire floor to knock you off. You pound it back into the ground, then beat his face until it looks like the pumpkin you forgot you bought in July. After defeating Hercules, you learn that the Nemean Cestus can be used to destroy anything made of onyx. In the next area, a woman is shouting for help, but when she sees Kratos, she says she doesn't want his help. Regardless of whether or not she wants it, she's gonna get it. You solve some puzzles and make it to her room where Poseidon had her chained up, and she was essentially his sex slave. You set her free and escort her back to a lever that opens these gates but doesn't stay open long enough for you to reach the Pandora statue. This is one of the more memorable and atrocious things Kratos does in this game, where he uses this woman to hold up the lever and you get to hear her get crushed to death so you can reach the statue. Once you arrive, Pandora gets captured by Zeus. There are notes laying around of Poseidon saying that Zeus isn't the same man he once was, but that's for a later discussion. Pandora tells you to go to the labyrinth, so that's what you'll do. You'll meet Aphrodite in the next area, and to call her a thought would be an understatement. She tells you that Hephaestus can help fix the bridges outside, and there's a Hyperion gate between her legs that are only accessible by you. It's not very subtle either. I say no like a good Christian boy because we ain't no simp. The strongest man is the one that can turn down sex because he knows to keep himself on a clear mind. It's not post-nut clarity, it is pre-nut clarity. You enter the Hyperion gate and speak to Hephaestus. He realizes after he's asked about the labyrinth that Kratos is after Pandora and refuses to help. It's time for another sob story. Hephaestus forged Pandora's box, but when he began to forge the key, it became alive, and that key was Pandora. The lock was the flame of Olympus, but Hephaestus came to love Pandora as a daughter. He told Zeus that the safest place to keep the box was on the back of Kronos, but this was a lie to protect Pandora. Whenever Kratos retrieved the box, it became clear to Zeus that Hephaestus lied. How did it become clear to him? I'm not entirely sure, actually. Maybe it ties into something else regarding Pandora's box we'll get to later, but it still doesn't make a lot of sense. He tortured Hephaestus until he confessed, and Zeus took Pandora. He then locked Hephaestus where he is now. He tells Kratos that he can't take Pandora to the flame or she'll die. And of course, our friendly neighborhood vengeful demigod says he doesn't care. Hephaestus thinks about it for a minute, then has a change of heart, telling Kratos to go to the pit of Tartarus to get a stone so he can forge him a weapon.
This weapon will give you the retribution you so rightly deserve.
Once there, you find Gaia's hand, and Kronos picks you up. He says he knows that you killed Gaia and that he's going to kill you. This starts more of a spectacle and puzzle boss than anything else. You climb around on Kronos until he finally eats you. Once inside, you cut out of his body with the blade of Olympus and find the stone you were looking for. Why was it inside Kronos? I don't know. How would Kratos even know what it is? I really don't know. After this, you break his chains and stab him through the mouth with one of the links, and finally put him down with the blade of Olympus. It's a cool boss to look at, but it's not very interesting gameplay-wise. You make it back to Hephaestus, and Kratos is none too happy with him. He crafts you some lightning chains and electrocutes you with them whenever you take them. I don't need to tell you what happens. You get a chance to bang his wife when you get back, probably because the devs knew that the player would feel betrayed by his actions and no longer feel obligated by the bro code like they might have before. Unfortunately for her, I'm on a diet, and roast beef is not on the menu. Just a little fun fact for everyone watching, Aphrodite is actually related to Kratos. She's either his half-sister or a distant aunt, and even though Greek mythology doesn't shy away from incest, it might make her allure a little bit lacking unless you want to be the best brother a girl can ask for. You run into Hera again in the next area. She's completely drunk this time, and she claims that you're too stupid to solve the puzzles in this area. I'd say I'm offended, but I actually needed the game to give me a hint for me to figure it out. Not before I was introduced to an old friend and got my ass kicked, though. You find Hera shortly after, and she accidentally falls down the stairs.
Good luck with that little whore you call Pandora.
With the planets around you dead or dying, as they should be, you can use Hera's dead body to solve some unique perspective puzzles. In the next area, you'll pass through a dark cave full of scorpions, then come to one of the hardest fights in the entire game. I remember this being the most difficult battle on my first playthrough to the point where I needed to look up a guide on how to beat it because I was convinced it was impossible. I'm happy to report that I got through this while barely taking any damage. You need to fight multiple Cyclops, probably around 6 or 7. You're given one Cyclops that you can ride around for some bonus damage, but it doesn't stick around long enough for you to kill them all, so you want to damage as many of them as possible without actually killing them. This should give you a chance to execute numerous of them and then pick off the remaining few. It's not easy by any stretch, but like I said, I barely took any damage during this fight, at least on this attempt. You travel through some more caves and then come to the next boss fight, a giant scorpion. I also remember this fight driving me to near madness on my first playthrough, but it really isn't that bad. There's some issues when you're attacking the hind legs and it begins to slam its stinger. Sometimes you can get stuck on the legs and you can't get out of the way before it lands. This only happened a couple of times, so my solution was to use a magic attack to gain some temporary invincibility. Once it's dead, you get the key to the labyrinth. You then find Daedalus, who mistakes you for Icarus, his son. Zeus told him that if he builds the labyrinth, he would return his son to him, and you get the pleasure of informing him that Icarus does not live. You activate the labyrinth, presumably killing Daedalus. The next area takes place within the labyrinth itself, and it consists of combat, puzzles, traps, combat with traps, puzzles with traps. You get the idea. I remember this part being much more difficult from when I played last time, and I know I've said it a lot lately, but it was much easier than I remember. Either playing Bloodborne and Dark Souls has molded me to handle challenges, or playing 5 God of War games have prepared me for the more refined combat system in this game. It's hard to imagine me struggling so much on this part back when I played on easy and breezing through it like it's nothing on hard. You get through the first few rooms and make it to Pandora. Zeus has beaten her and she wakes up when you arrive. With her help, you can make your way out of the labyrinth. You get her through a gate you can't access so she can open it, but she gets trapped in a tank in the process and it begins to fill with water. You do eventually make it stop, but she had already been under for a while by that point. She's still alive and you move onward. Pandora tells her side of the story with Hephaestus. She says that she could hear the fear in the gods' voices when they beat him, and it was the fear of Kratos. She mentions how hearing them scared gave her hope, to which Kratos says,
"Hope is for the weak, Pandora."
Hope is what makes us strong. It is why we are here. It is what we fight with when all else is lost.
This is what hope delivers, child. You should learn that now.
The next room is another endurance fight that goes on for so long I thought the enemies were on infinite respawn. It wasn't hard, but I think I was playing better than usual for this recording session because I was just bullying these poor wraiths and sirens to the point where I thought it wasn't even fair. Once you're on top of the labyrinth, Pandora tells you that you need to break the chain of balance. This involves you jumping down the same part you flew up from before and fighting the flaming Cerberus at the bottom. Once proving to myself that I could in fact not spam magic to win, I decided to restart a checkpoint but accidentally opened photo mode. Here's a background-worthy screenshot of my mistake, followed by another version with a Kratos-style surprise Pikachu for a head. Consider it a moment of silence. And here's what happened when I exited photo mode. This fight is notorious for being difficult, but I still feel the need to spend some time on it. Most of the angry rants I've done throughout these games have been cut, but I'm going to leave this one in because I think it's the most valid. Let's talk about why this fight is so infuriating. First off, this fight is bordering unfair, and I say bordering because it is 100% doable. But it requires a playstyle that was vastly different from what I had been using up until that point. I'm going to dissect this fight into phases because the Cerberus isn't dead until all 3 of its heads are killed and new enemies spawn in after each head. The Cerberus itself is not a challenge. It has some moves you need to watch out for, but most of them can be parried. The Nagasaki dogs can be killed to prevent an explosion, or they can be grabbed and kicked back at the Cerberus for some extra damage. Doing this leaves you open to another exploding dog that can damage you because you can't get out of the way in time. There's one other strategy you can use that worked for me, and I'll get into that when I discuss how I got through this, because it took me a very long time to get through this fight. After you kill the first head, phase 2 begins. The benefit is that the Cerberus can only spit out as many dogs as they have heads, so you'll be dealing with 1 less dog and 1 more satyr. Let's discuss the satyrs a little bit because they're not as bad as the first God of War, but they do carry over some of my gripes from that game as well. They can block or dodge almost all your attacks and can come at you with long combo chains that can stun lock you. I'm sure it's possible to kill this guy before dealing with the Cerberus, but I didn't do that. You don't want to waste all your magic on this stage either, because in the next stage you have to fight 2 more and finish off the big dog. By this point, the exploding dogs are a non-issue, or at least they were for me because this was the quickest phase when I ran through it, and it's related to my strategy to get through the fight. I spent more time on just this one fight than any other part of these games. I spent 1 hour and 8 minutes on this fight. I had 10 deaths, 26 resets, a 7-minute break to regain my composure, and I told my monitor to go fuck itself twice. I eventually got so comfortable with the first phase of this fight that I got through it without taking any damage a couple of times. After the game continuously insulted me by asking if I wanted to change the difficulty to easy, one time came right before I was about to kill the Cerberus when Kratos decided to grab the satyr instead of the giant flaming dog with a floating circle above its head. I decided to start resetting the checkpoints when I knew I didn't have enough health to get through the rest of the fight, which was around 2/3. The next thing I needed to do was stop playing the game how I had up until that point. This fight reminds me a lot of the Marauder from Doom Eternal. Your old strategy won't work, find a new one or get your ass kicked. As much as this fight did piss me off, it also pushed me to use more tools than I normally would, and if that was Santa Monica's intention, then this fight is a huge success. Because even though it's possible to get by doing the same thing you have been up until now, I think you're really hurting your chances of success by doing it. Let me explain what I mean by that. Up until now, I have mostly been using the blades. They're quick, they're efficient, and in the words of Todd Howard, they just work. I would occasionally use the Nemean Cestus when the situation called for it, like the Scorpion fight or when dealing with shield users, but I almost always went back to the blades after. I had been upgrading all my weapons except the Nemesis Whip just in case I needed them, so both the Claws of Hades and the Cestus were max level alongside the blades. The game gives you 4 different weapons, each with their own strengths and weaknesses, and an air dash that I totally forgot about. Up until now, I had been playing God of War 3 just like God of War 1 and 2. If you've ever tried playing Doom Eternal like Doom 2016, then you can see why this wasn't working. The difference is that Doom Eternal forces you to use all your tools, but God of War 3 doesn't until this point. This encounter is the only test in the entire game that requires you to get creative with your moveset, and you never have to do it again. Here's how I got through this fight. Many people use the Nemean Cestus for this part, but I found the Claws of Hades more effective. They can sweep the dogs before they have a chance to explode and have impressive range. I air dashed more times in this fight than I have the entire game, but I found that getting behind the Cerberus when it was spitting out nuclear canines and using a special attack or two was very effective. This worked perfectly for the first phase, but always failed in the second. Despite this, I couldn't find a more effective strategy, so I eventually decided to just make do. Magic with the claws is less expensive than magic with the blades, but it's also less effective. I used that a couple times to give me some breathing room before switching to the blades to use a more costly magic attack that got me through. The third stage was absolute hell. I can count on one hand how many times I've used the Blade of Olympus in this game, but it's what I needed to get through this final phase. Drain your magic, use the blade, and you should be in a good spot. After killing the Cerberus, I stopped playing aggressively. Satyrs are too strong to be reckless with, so I totaled up and chipped their health down, just like old times. At the end of this fight, I didn't feel like I overcame a challenge that was 100% fair. I felt like I had thrown myself at a wall until it finally gave, but I did discover a completely different side of this game that I never focused on before. This fight isn't very good. It's incredibly frustrating, but it does help show that there's much more you can do to overcome it. It's a shame that most of the game can be done with just one strategy. After taking an hour break, you destroy the 3 judges and then break the chain of balance. Pandora tells you to hurry and that Zeus knows she's escaped, and you hear her screaming whenever you make your way back to her. When you arrive, Athena is there and everything seems fine. I'm not sure if Athena was faking it to make Kratos hurry back or if she helped protect Pandora in some way, but in any case, you climb the chain and raise the labyrinth. She tries to enter the flame of Olympus and Kratos tries to stop her. Zeus arrives because you wasted too much time and he throws Pandora aside. This pisses Kratos off and starts your fight with Zeus. Because of the perspective, I think that the Nemean Cestus is much more reliable here. After the fight, Pandora attempts to jump into the flame. Kratos once again tries to stop her, but lets go whenever Zeus says this.
Don't listen to her, Kratos. For once in your pathetic life, don't fail. Don't fail her like you failed your family.
Once you open the box, you find it empty. Zeus taunts you one more time before running off. You give chase and find Zeus outside.
Such chaos. I will have much to do after I kill you. Face me, father. It is time to end this. Yes, my son. It is time.
After fighting for a while, Gaia arrives. Apparently she survived the fall after all, and she's not happy to see you. You fight Zeus near her heart and eventually impale them both with the Blade of Olympus. This kills her, essentially killing the last Titan as well. After pulling the Blade of Olympus out of Zeus's corpse, he turns into a ghost. He strips you of all your tools and drains all your meters. You're then put inside Kratos' mind. This has you confronting all of Kratos' regrets, and Pandora's voice guides you to help Kratos forgive himself for what he's done in his past. Finally, you get a flashback to what Pandora said before she died. By her saying this, it gives Kratos the power to fight back against Zeus. From a first-person perspective, just like in the beginning when you kill Poseidon, you fight back against Zeus's ghost and force it back into his body, and then you beat him to death. With Zeus dead, the chains fall off Kratos' arms and Athena returns to commend you for a job well done. What follows is the final explanation about Pandora's box, and now is when I'd like to discuss it. What Athena tells you about Pandora's box is a variation of how it works in actual Greek mythology. I've read a little bit of Greek mythology since I started this project, so I'm a little more appreciative of this explanation than I was when I first played, but I still don't like it very much. In the context of the games, the war with the Titans created several evils and unleashed them onto the world. These evils were fear, hate, and greed. Athena was concerned about what would happen if the box were ever open, so she put hope in the box along with it, which she describes as the most powerful thing in the world. She believed that whenever Kratos opened the box, he used the evils to fight back against Ares, but it turns out that he actually drew from the power of hope, but was unable to use it after killing Ares because of his regrets. Meanwhile, Zeus was consumed with fear and became obsessed with Kratos' death. There are notes in the room with Poseidon's sex slave that mention how Zeus has become more obsessive and anxious lately. Hera also mentions that Zeus is afraid of Kratos. It does explain why Zeus flipped and beat Hephaestus within an inch of his life, but it could also be an explanation as to why Athena wasn't allowed to fight back against Ares. This isn't confirmed in-game from what I found, but it would make sense if Zeus had forbidden the gods from warring with each other because it might recreate these evils that were locked away, but it doesn't explain why he would risk letting Kratos open the box in order to stop Ares. There are several reasons why I don't like this explanation. For one, Kratos was literally rebelling against the gods whenever Zeus stepped in to kill him. Zeus tried to reason with Kratos and goes to Sparta while disguised as the Gravedigger, and this game confirms that game as canon with a note in the underworld. So if Zeus was consumed with fear after the events of the first game, what took him so long? You could say that Athena was protecting him, but if Zeus was consumed with fear, then why would he care what Athena says? You see how we can go in circles about this. It tries to give an explanation where one wasn't really needed, and I commend Santa Monica for trying to be more true to the legend of Pandora's box, but I feel like it wasn't really necessary. The only thing this explanation adds is a bit of a mindfuck moment after you kill Zeus, but it's hard to catch. After fighting with his ghost, which I believe is actually the fear that's controlling him manifesting in this form, you can see something leave Zeus afterward. In other words, the evil that's possessing him has left and Zeus is back to normal. If Kratos for some reason relented at this moment, Zeus would have no desire to kill him. This whole ordeal could have ended right here if Kratos had paused, but as we talked about before this section of the video, he has little reason to. Fear had nothing to do with Zeus kidnapping Deimos or putting a curse on Kratos' mother, but he did that anyways. Fear had nothing to do with them refusing to relieve him of his nightmares, but they still did that too. This little bit of good doesn't outweigh the bad in my eyes, but it's also important to note that this is 100% my opinion. I'm not going to make any objective claims on this one because it's not something that can be factually measured. After Kratos kills Zeus, he starts to stare out at the aftermath of his rampage. Athena says that because the world is in chaos and free from the reign of Olympus, it's ready to hear her message. She demands that Kratos give her the power of hope, but he refuses. She insists, claiming that it's her power and that she understands it the most, so she's the one who deserves to have it. Kratos continues to turn her down, and she starts acting more and more like a child to the point of saying that he owes her for everything she's done for him. Does it feel at all like Kratos has been manipulated by Athena this whole time? Did it feel at all like Kratos was being manipulated by Gaia and the rest of the Olympian gods? If you've gotten this far into the video, I don't need to repeat the point. Realizing that his vengeance brought him no peace, Kratos sets down the blade of Olympus, his last true connection to Joel, and walks away. Wait, no, wrong game. In one last act of defiance, and feeling the weight of what he's done, Kratos impales himself with the blade of Olympus and releases the power of hope into the world, which if it's as strong as Athena claims should be enough to naturally set things back in order over time, or give the few remaining survivors a reason to go on.
My disappointment is immeasurable, and my day is ruined.
The Blade of Olympus is drained of its power in the process, which is important to mention. Kratos is left with a gaping hole where he stabbed himself with the Blade of Olympus. We get one last look at it before the credits roll. In a post-credit scene, you see that Kratos has dragged himself to the ocean and jumped in. Before God of War 2018, nobody knew what this meant, but now that we have that game, it makes a bit more sense. He survived. With this game concluded, let's do some setup for the next one. Note when I said that the Blade of Olympus lost its power when Kratos impaled himself, and recall that the power inside the blade was his godhood from the previous games. I mentioned after we beat Hades that Kratos regained his godhood at some point, and I believe that it happens at this moment. Note in God of War 2 that Zeus killing Kratos didn't restore his godhood, and likewise when Kratos impales Athena or Zeus, although it does appear in the God of War 2 Zeus fight that Kratos managed to drain Zeus's godhood to some degree. I'm speculating that the blade has the potential to release the power, but only if the rightful owner is the one who does it, or if you command it to in some way. I don't think Kratos meant to restore his godhood by doing this. The blade was the last weapon he had, and he wanted to die. I think it was an unintended side effect that him being the one to shove the blade into his stomach released his powers back into his body, causing him to survive this. There are several hot discussion topics that there are potential answers for, but not many of them are confirmed. I'll be talking more about them in the next game, and some of these questions do have vague answers provided by the writers, but this one I can say for certain is correct. The blade losing its power is enough to confirm this in my mind. And with that, God of War 3 is over. I had a lot of fun revisiting these 6 games, but I am glad to have this behind me. I really appreciate you guys for watching. The rest of this video will be boring explanation stuff, talking about why it took me nigh on 3 months to get this done. So, if you're still here by this point, welcome to my TED Talk. This is going to be the unscripted portion of the video. So, here's what's going on. I started out playing the games, and I have, essentially for my computer, I have a terabyte of storage. I have like 2 500 gigabyte hard drives on my computer, and believe it or not, I actually like maxed it out after playing like Ascension, I'm pretty sure. So it took me a little while for me to edit the videos and then clear up space, and I had to edit these videos in like sections in order to make it work, and finally I was able to get through it. In the process of that, I had a little bit of family stuff going on that kind of took me away from the project, and once that got sorted out, I had college work to get caught up on because I fell behind due to said family stuff. So I had exams to study for, and my grade is tumultuous right now, but, you know, it is what it is. And once I got caught up on that, we had an ice storm come through where I live, and that knocked out power for a week. Or, we had power, but it's like, we'd get constant power surges, so I couldn't reliably edit or work or do anything, so we essentially had no power as far as the project is concerned. So that happened. So then I ran out of storage again. And that's whenever I decided that I was going to split the God of War analysis into the like first 6 games, and then the God of War 2018 being its own video, because this would take forever to get done if I didn't do that. So that basically happened, I think either a few weeks ago or sometime last month is whenever the storm came through. And then I just took a little bit of a break, just kind of to focus more on schoolwork and all that good jazz. And finally, here we are. It's the 19th of November, and I expected to have this video done at the end of October. So you see how bad I am at planning these things. So once this is uploaded, I'm going to go ahead and take a break for the rest of the semester before I start the next project. I am probably going to gather footage for another game that I'm going to be playing in the meantime. I haven't had very much time to like sit down and play video games. I think I just sat down. I haven't hung out with my friends like online in months. The first time I did it, I hung out with my buddy Alex the other day. He let me download Cold War so we could play some zombies. And it's not bad. It's not great. There's your Black Ops Cold War analysis. At least the zombies. It's just not great. But anyway, that was the first time I hung out with him in like 2 or 3 months. So I've been neglecting everything, but we're going to get it done, and this is going to get uploaded, and it's going to be a good time. And then once we're done with that, there is another game, like I said. I'm not going to say what it is, because I may decide not to do it yet. I may decide to do the God of War first, but this other one's definitely going to take more time. So there's another game I want to do that I've been like, I started playing it in May of this year. The last time I played it actually was in May of this year, and I have been itching to get back into it, but I haven't touched it because I haven't had the time, and it's really a game that I need to sit down and like commit the time to, and I haven't been able to find that. So that's basically a brief summary of what's been going on and why this has taken so long. And now that that is done, I guess I can go ahead and find something witty to wrap up this video with. So if you guys made it to this very, very, very end of the video, I appreciate it. I really appreciate you guys for watching. I know I have a lot of people who recently subscribed as of like 2-3 weeks ago, and I know that you guys were anticipating this, and you've probably been getting impatient waiting for this, so I'm real sorry about that, but you know, life happens, and it's just, there's not much you can do about it all the time. So again, I appreciate you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.